Spies have long been a part of human history, shaping the outcomes of wars, altering political landscapes, and shifting the balance of power. Throughout time, these covert agents have operated in the shadows, manipulating information and betraying nations. Some spies are celebrated as heroes, while others are remembered for the tremendous betrayals they committed. In this collection, we'll explore 20 of the most disturbing spies throughout history, examining their methods, motives, and the consequences of their espionage. From ancient times to modern cyber espionage, these stories reveal the dark and often dangerous world of spying. Mata Hari, whose real name was Margareta Gertruida Zell, is one of the most iconic and controversial figures in the history of espionage. Born in 1876 in Leeuwarden, Netherlands, she rose from a relatively obscure background to become a world-renowned exotic dancer and courtesan. Yet, beneath her glamorous exterior, Mata Hari was deeply entangled in the dark, secretive world of espionage during World War I. Her name remains synonymous with betrayal and intrigue, her life embodying the intersection of sex, power, and subversion in a time of global conflict. Mata Hari's story is filled with mystery, fascination, and ultimate tragedy, leaving behind a legacy that continues to be debated to this day. Mata Hari was born into a relatively middle-class family in the Netherlands. Her father, a successful hat maker, went bankrupt when Mata Hari was just a child, and the family's financial troubles severely impacted her upbringing. Her mother was also reportedly cold and distant, and the family struggled emotionally as well as financially. At 18, Mata Hari was married to a much older man, a Dutch colonial officer named Rudolf MacLeod, whom she met in her early adulthood. They moved to Indonesia, where, during the early years of their marriage, she gave birth to 2 children, but the relationship soon turned abusive. Her husband was an alcoholic, and their marriage became troubled, both emotionally and physically. After experiencing years of isolation and mistreatment, Mata Hari left her husband in 1903. She moved to Paris, a city that would be both her sanctuary and her undoing. This was the beginning of her reinvention. She adopted the name Mata Hari, which translates from Malay as Eye of the Dawn, a reference to her role as an enigmatic, captivating woman who could cast a spell over her audience. The name reflected both the allure and the mystery that would define her career. In Paris, Mata Hari found success as an exotic dancer. She began performing at high-profile venues such as the Musée Guimet, which was known for its collection of Asian art, where her performances combined elements of Eastern mysticism with her own sensuality. She was celebrated for her sensual, suggestive dance routines, which often incorporated revealing costumes and the use of symbolism drawn from Eastern traditions, particularly from India and the Far East. Her shows were highly theatrical, often involving the use of snake-like movements and suggestive gestures that captivated her audiences. Her performances were not just dances, they were artistic statements designed to push the boundaries of conventional entertainment. She was a product of her time, during an era when Paris was a hub for avant-garde artists and intellectuals, and she played to the role of a bold, seductive woman who defied the social mores of the period. Mata Hari became an immediate sensation, a symbol of liberation and the power of female sexuality. Her fame spread across Europe, and she quickly attracted wealthy lovers, influential men in high society, and political figures. It was this combination of beauty, sensuality, and mystery that would make her an appealing target for espionage. World War I provided the perfect storm for Mata Hari. The war created an environment of chaos and secrecy in Europe, and Mata Hari, with her charm and connections, became an ideal candidate for espionage. By 1916, she had already established herself as a prominent figure in Europe's elite circles, mingling with diplomats, military officers, and aristocrats. During this time, she was approached by German agents who saw her potential as a spy. In exchange for money and protection, she agreed to gather intelligence for Germany. Mata Hari's role as a spy was complex, and the exact details of her activities remain unclear. Some historians argue that she was largely a pawn in a game of larger political maneuvers used by both the Germans and the French, but others believe that she was more actively involved in espionage than she admitted. According to some accounts, Mata Hari's role was limited to passing along trivial information or engaging in small acts of espionage. Yet her sexual relationships with various men in positions of power, especially with military officers and politicians, were used by the Germans to obtain valuable intelligence. Mata Hari, however, did not remain loyal to any one side for long. After serving the Germans, she was recruited by the French in 1917. She was now playing both sides of the espionage game, which would eventually lead to her downfall. She was arrested by the French in 1917, accused of being a double agent, working for the Germans while secretly passing information to the French. Mata Hari's arrest was part of a larger crackdown on spies during World War I. At the time, the French were suffering heavy losses on the battlefield, and the French military was eager to find someone to blame for the failure of their intelligence efforts. The French authorities believed that Mata Hari's activities had led to the deaths of many soldiers and compromised the war effort. She was arrested on suspicion of espionage and treason in early 1917. During her trial, Mata Hari was accused of using her sexual relationships with powerful men to extract sensitive military information. The French military court held that she had provided the Germans with intelligence that led to the deaths of thousands of French soldiers. She was tried in a military court and denied any wrongdoing, but the prosecution's case was strong, based largely on circumstantial evidence and her own admissions of using her sexual appeal to gain access to high-ranking officers. In addition, her extravagant lifestyle and her relationships with numerous men of influence only fueled the perception that she was a spy who had betrayed her country for personal gain. The trial was a spectacle, with Mata Hari's glamorous image making her a media sensation. Her defense was weak, as the evidence against her was overwhelming, though much of it was speculative. Mata Hari claimed that she had been a scapegoat, a woman blamed for the failures of others, but the court was unforgiving. On July 24, 1917, she was found guilty of espionage and sentenced to death by firing squad. Mata Hari was executed on October 15, 1917. She was 41 years old. Despite her tragic end, her legacy has lived on in popular culture. Over the years, Mata Hari has been portrayed as both a tragic victim of wartime politics and a cunning, calculating woman who used her beauty to manipulate men and betray nations. The truth of her involvement in espionage remains shrouded in mystery. Many historians continue to debate whether she was truly a spy or whether she was an innocent woman caught in a web of political intrigue. In the decades since her execution, Mata Hari's story has taken on a life of its own. She has been portrayed as the quintessential femme fatale, a woman who used her sexuality to navigate the male-dominated world of espionage. Movies, books, and plays have continued to depict her as a woman who defied the conventions of her time, taking control of her fate, albeit in a tragic and ultimately self-destructive manner. Despite the mythologizing of her life, the true nature of Mata Hari's espionage activities remains difficult to fully discern. Some argue that she was a pawn in a larger game, a woman who used the only tools available to her in a world that objectified and subjugated women. Others claim that she was an ambitious and self-serving individual who used espionage as a means to rise above her humble beginnings. Whatever the truth, Mata Hari's story remains one of the most fascinating and disturbing in the history of espionage. Her execution, however, became a symbol of the dangers faced by women in times of war and political chaos. While the world may never know the full extent of her involvement in espionage, the legacy of her life, mysterious, provocative, and tragic, continues to captivate the imaginations of people around the world. The case of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg is one of the most controversial espionage trials in American history. The couple, accused of passing atomic secrets to the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War, were convicted of espionage and executed in 1953. Their case raised questions about the US government's pursuit of justice, the balance between national security and civil liberties, and the chilling nature of the atomic age. The Rosenberg story remains a deeply polarizing chapter in the history of espionage, with some seeing them as martyrs to the cause of anti-communism, while others view them as victims of a witch hunt fueled by paranoia and fear. To understand the gravity of the Rosenbergs' case, it's essential to consider the atmosphere of the Cold War in the late 1940s and early 1950s. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a global ideological battle, with both nations vying for supremacy. The Cold War had its roots in the aftermath of World War II, as the Soviet Union expanded its influence over Eastern Europe, and the US sought to contain the spread of communism worldwide. The nuclear arms race between the two superpowers began almost immediately after the war, with the US developing and using atomic bombs in 1945, and the Soviets conducting their first successful atomic test in 1949. The anxiety surrounding the atomic bomb and its potential for mass destruction was palpable. The world had never before seen a weapon with such devastating power, and both nations understood that control over nuclear weapons would shape the future of global politics. This atmosphere of fear and suspicion provided fertile ground for espionage. Both the US and the Soviet Union sought to obtain secrets about each other's nuclear programs, and many individuals within both countries were recruited to provide that intelligence. Julius Rosenberg was born in 1918 to Jewish immigrants in New York City. He grew up in a time of political unrest, and his early life was marked by the hardships of the Great Depression. He was drawn to left-wing politics and became an active member of the Young Communist League while studying at the City College of New York. His political beliefs were shaped by the Marxist ideals of socialism, and he saw the Soviet Union as a bulwark against the capitalist oppression he saw in the West. Despite his deep commitment to communism, Julius was a highly intelligent and ambitious individual who believed that his skills in electronics could contribute to the cause. Julius's work in electronics would eventually lead him to a job at the US Army Signal Corps, where he worked on classified military projects. It was in the Army that he met a man named David Greenglass, who would later play a crucial role in the espionage activities that would lead to the Rosenbergs' conviction. Greenglass was an Army machinist who worked on the development of the atomic bomb at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, and he became one of Julius's primary sources for atomic intelligence. By the early 1940s, Julius had left his position at the Army Signal Corps and began working for the US government as a civilian contractor. He was recruited by the Soviet intelligence service, the NKVD, the precursor to the KGB, to gather information on the US atomic program. Julius, who was a fervent believer in the Soviet cause, saw this as a way to help level the playing field between the US and the Soviet Union. He believed that the sharing of atomic secrets would help prevent any one nation from gaining too much power. He was recruited by the Soviets to spy on the Manhattan Project, the US program that was developing the atomic bomb. Ethel Rosenberg, Julius's wife, was an equally complex figure in this espionage tale. Born in 1915, Ethel was raised in an immigrant Jewish family, much like her husband. While Julius was drawn to politics, Ethel's early life was characterized by ambition and a desire to succeed. She studied at the Juilliard School and had aspirations to be a singer, but her career ambitions were sidelined by the rise of the Cold War and the demands of motherhood. Though Ethel initially had no direct involvement in her husband's espionage activities, she became increasingly involved in his work as the years went by. In 1944, Julius recruited his wife to assist in his espionage efforts, and by 1945, Ethel was allegedly passing on the classified information her husband had obtained from David Greenglass. According to the prosecution's case, Ethel typed up the intelligence that was passed on to the Soviet Union, which allegedly included detailed information about the atomic bomb. Ethel was not directly involved in the theft of atomic secrets, but was accused of aiding her husband in passing the information to Soviet agents. Much of Ethel's role in the espionage ring was speculative, and there has been ongoing debate about how involved she truly was. Some argue that she was a passive participant, simply acting as a supportive wife, while others contend that she played an active role in the conspiracy. Despite the lack of concrete evidence that she was directly involved in espionage, Ethel was arrested alongside Julius and charged with conspiracy to commit espionage. The Rosenbergs were arrested in 1950 after a long investigation that had been initiated by the US government. The investigation into the Rosenbergs was sparked by the capture of Klaus Fuchs, a British scientist who had been passing nuclear secrets to the Soviet Union. Fuchs's testimony and the eventual confessions of several other individuals, including David Greenglass, led to the Rosenbergs' arrest. At their trial in 1951, the prosecution argued that Julius and Ethel had conspired with Greenglass to steal atomic secrets and pass them on to the Soviet Union. The case against them was based largely on the testimony of Greenglass, who claimed that Julius had recruited him to provide information about the atomic bomb. Ethel was accused of typing the notes that contained the stolen secrets. The trial was highly publicized and became a spectacle that divided the nation. The Rosenbergs were denied access to key evidence in their defense, and they were not allowed to present a case that could counter the charges against them. The political climate of the time, marked by McCarthyism and the Red Scare, played a significant role in the outcome of their trial. Many believed the Rosenbergs were targeted not just for espionage, but for their political affiliations and their support of communism. In 1951, the Rosenbergs were found guilty of espionage and sentenced to death. Their conviction was based on circumstantial evidence, and many believed they were made an example of to send a message to others who might sympathize with communism. The trial was widely criticized, with many questioning the fairness of the proceedings and the severity of the punishment. Even in the face of international protests and calls for clemency, the Rosenbergs' fate was sealed. They were executed by electric chair at Sing Sing prison on June 19, 1953. The execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg remains one of the most controversial moments in American legal history. The Rosenbergs were the first American civilians to be executed for espionage during peacetime, and their case has continued to spark debate for decades. Many people believed that the Rosenbergs were victims of the political climate of the time, that they were unfairly convicted, and that their executions were a product of the hysteria surrounding communism. Their trial became a symbol of the broader struggle between civil liberties and national security, raising questions about the legitimacy of government action during times of fear. In the years following their execution, new information came to light that suggested Julius Rosenberg had indeed passed atomic secrets to the Soviets, though Ethel's involvement remained unclear. In the 1990s, the release of Venona transcripts, declassified documents from the US government's counterintelligence efforts, revealed that Julius had indeed been involved in espionage, although some aspects of the case remained murky. The transcripts did not provide conclusive evidence regarding Ethel's involvement, leading many to argue that her execution was unjust. Today, the legacy of the Rosenbergs continues to be debated. While some view them as martyrs to the cause of anti-communism, others see them as victims of political persecution and a miscarriage of justice. The case remains a haunting reminder of the complex intersection of espionage, politics, and justice in the Cold War era, and the Rosenbergs' names remain forever tied to the darker side of American history. Eli Cohen, an Israeli spy, is one of the most famous spies in history due to his remarkable ability to infiltrate the highest echelons of the Syrian government during the early 1960s. His espionage activities were instrumental in providing Israel with crucial intelligence, particularly in relation to Syria's military plans ahead of the Six-Day War in 1967. The story of Eli Cohen is a powerful testament to the ingenuity and dedication of intelligence operatives, but it is also a tragic reminder of the risks and sacrifices that spies make for their country. Eli Cohen was born in Alexandria, Egypt, in 1924 to a Jewish family. Growing up in a period of political upheaval in the Middle East, he witnessed the rise of nationalism and the conflicts between Arabs and Jews in the region. Cohen moved to Palestine in 1947, where he joined the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, during the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. His skills as a communicator and his knowledge of Arabic made him a valuable asset to Israeli intelligence. It was clear that Cohen had an exceptional ability to blend in with different cultures, a skill that would later be crucial to his success as a spy. In the early 1960s, Israeli intelligence, particularly the Mossad, was eager to infiltrate Syria and gain intelligence on its military plans. Syria was Israel's most formidable adversary in the region, and its growing military power was a serious concern. Cohen was chosen for the mission due to his linguistic skills, his ability to adapt, and his understanding of Arab culture. After extensive training, including learning to mimic Syrian customs and speak with a Syrian accent, Cohen was sent to Argentina, where he posed as a wealthy Syrian businessman with ties to the Syrian government. Cohen's mission was risky and complicated, requiring him to establish himself as a trusted member of Syrian society, particularly among the military and political elite. He posed as Kamel Amin Thabet, a wealthy Syrian businessman who had recently returned from a successful career in South America. Cohen's charm, linguistic skills, and ability to blend in allowed him to quickly earn the trust of key figures in Syria. He was invited to high-profile events, military gatherings, and political meetings where he was able to collect invaluable information. One of Cohen's greatest successes was his access to high-ranking military officials and his ability to convince them of his loyalty to the Syrian cause. He frequented the homes of top military officers, where he learned about Syria's military strategies and its plans for war with Israel. Cohen was also able to gather vital intelligence about Syria's defenses along the Golan Heights, a strategically important area for Israel. Over the course of his spying mission, Cohen's reports to Israel became increasingly detailed and strategic. His information provided Israel with critical intelligence about Syria's military capabilities, troop deployments, and plans for an attack. One of the most notable pieces of intelligence Cohen provided was the location of key Syrian military positions, which played a crucial role in Israel's victory during the Six-Day War in 1967. Cohen's intelligence also helped Israel strengthen its position in the Golan Heights and gain a tactical advantage over Syria. Despite his success, Cohen's position was ultimately compromised. In early 1965, Syrian intelligence began to grow suspicious of Cohen. One of the key factors that led to his downfall was his ability to send messages back to Israel. Cohen used an intricate system of coded messages, but he made the critical error of sending a message using a frequency that the Syrian authorities had begun to monitor. It was during this time that Syrian intelligence managed to track Cohen's transmissions to Israel, eventually leading them to his location. On January 24, 1965, Cohen was arrested by the Syrian authorities. His capture was a devastating blow to Israel's intelligence operations in the region, and the details of his arrest remain shrouded in mystery. Some reports suggest that Cohen was betrayed by a local contact, while others believe that his activities simply aroused too much suspicion. Regardless of how he was caught, Cohen's arrest marked the end of his incredible espionage mission. Cohen was quickly tried by a Syrian court, and despite his best efforts to defend himself, he was found guilty of espionage. His trial was heavily politicized, and he was not given a fair hearing. On May 18, 1965, Eli Cohen was executed by hanging in Damascus, Syria. His execution was a tragedy, and the news of his death was met with widespread grief in Israel. However, it also sparked a wave of public admiration for his bravery and sacrifice. Cohen's legacy has endured in Israel, where he is regarded as a national hero. His espionage efforts were instrumental in Israel's military success during the Six-Day War, and his intelligence helped shape the course of history in the Middle East. Despite his tragic death, Cohen's contributions to Israeli security and his remarkable infiltration of the Syrian government continue to be celebrated. In Israel, streets and buildings have been named after him, and his story is told as a testament to the sacrifices made by those who serve in the shadows of intelligence work. In the years following his execution, there were numerous attempts to recover Cohen's remains and bring them to Israel. However, these efforts have largely been unsuccessful, as Syria has refused to release his body. Nonetheless, Cohen's story remains a powerful reminder of the personal sacrifices spies make for their countries and the enormous risks they take to protect national security. His life and death demonstrate both the complexity of espionage and the dangers that come with infiltrating foreign governments during times of intense political conflict. While Eli Cohen's espionage activities contributed significantly to Israel's security and military operations, his story also raises important ethical questions about the morality of espionage. Was Cohen simply a patriot doing his duty for his country, or was he a pawn in a dangerous game of intelligence manipulation? Some critics argue that espionage, particularly in cases where it leads to the deaths of individuals, can never be justified. Others believe that Cohen's actions were necessary in the context of the Cold War and the Middle East's volatile political climate. Regardless of one's stance on the morality of espionage, Eli Cohen's legacy is undeniable. His ability to infiltrate the Syrian government and provide Israel with critical intelligence was nothing short of remarkable. His personal sacrifice and the tremendous risks he took to gather information are a testament to his dedication and commitment to his country. In the final analysis, Eli Cohen's life and legacy are a reminder of the hidden world of spies, those who operate in secrecy, putting their lives on the line to gather intelligence for their countries. Whether hero or victim, Cohen's story continues to captivate the imaginations of those who study espionage, military history, and the ethics of intelligence work. His extraordinary achievements and the personal cost of those achievements will forever be etched in the annals of spy history. Richard Sorge, a German-born Soviet spy, is considered one of the most successful and daring spies in history. His espionage efforts during World War II were instrumental in saving the Soviet Union from certain defeat, particularly during the pivotal Battle of Stalingrad. Sorge's story is one of intrigue, intelligence, and a shocking betrayal. Though Sorge's contributions to the Soviet war effort were critical, his story also exemplifies the personal costs of espionage and the dangers spies face when their loyalty to their countries is tested. Richard Sorge was born on October 4, 1895, in Baku, Azerbaijan, to a German family. He spent much of his early life in Russia, where his father worked as a chemist. Despite the family's German heritage, Sorge grew up in a politically turbulent environment that would shape his worldview. In his youth, Sorge was deeply influenced by Marxist ideology, which led him to become an active member of the Communist Party. His early political activities were primarily focused on socialist theory and the fight against fascism. But as his understanding of politics deepened, Sorge's commitment to communism intensified. Sorge's career as a journalist began in the 1920s when he moved to Germany and started working for various left-wing publications. However, his time as a journalist was short-lived, as he soon realized that he could serve the Soviet Union's interests more effectively as a spy. By the mid-1930s, Sorge was recruited by the Soviet Union's intelligence agency, the NKVD, later known as the KGB, to gather intelligence on Nazi Germany. He was a natural choice for espionage work, thanks to his fluency in German, Russian, and English, and his ability to blend into foreign societies. In 1933, Sorge moved to Japan as a journalist for a German publication. He worked for the Frankfurter Zeitung, a prestigious newspaper, and used his position to infiltrate Japan's political and military elite. Japan was a critical location for Soviet intelligence efforts, as its alliance with Nazi Germany posed a grave threat to the Soviet Union. Sorge's assignment was to gather intelligence on German-Japanese relations, particularly their secret pact to divide spheres of influence in Europe and Asia. Sorge's mission in Japan was fraught with difficulty. In a foreign country where he did not speak the language fluently and where political tensions were high, Sorge had to carefully navigate the complex world of Japanese politics and military affairs. His first few years in Japan were spent slowly building relationships with influential figures, particularly within the Japanese military and intelligence community. Sorge was incredibly adept at gaining the trust of key officials. He formed relationships with high-ranking members of Japan's military and government, including a number of influential officers who would later become his primary sources of information. He ingratiated himself with the Japanese elite by playing the part of a pro-German, anti-Soviet journalist. Despite his deep ideological commitment to communism, Sorge knew that he had to maintain the facade of neutrality and sometimes even sympathetic support for Nazi Germany. In 1939, Sorge was able to establish himself within the inner circle of the Japanese military. He met and befriended several top officers, including the Japanese military attaché in Berlin, and quickly gained their trust. By this time, Sorge's role as a spy for the Soviet Union had expanded, and he began transmitting critical intelligence back to Moscow about Japan's military plans, particularly its intentions in the Pacific and its alliance with Nazi Germany. His most significant piece of intelligence came in 1941. Sorge received word that Japan had no plans to attack the Soviet Union in the near future. This was vital information for Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, who had been worried that Japan might launch an invasion from the east while the USSR was fighting the Nazis in the west. Sorge's intelligence enabled the Soviet Union to reallocate troops and resources to the European front, significantly strengthening the Soviet defense against Nazi Germany. Despite Sorge's success in gathering vital intelligence, his cover was eventually blown. In 1941, Sorge's communications with Moscow were intercepted by the Japanese military, who began to suspect his true allegiance. Sorge was arrested by the Japanese police in October 1941, and despite the fact that he had meticulously covered his tracks, he was eventually tortured and forced to confess to his espionage activities. His detailed confessions revealed not only his involvement in espionage, but also the names of many of his contacts within the Japanese government and military. Sorge's arrest was a devastating blow to the Soviet Union, but his intelligence had already played a crucial role in the Soviet war effort. By the time he was captured, the Battle of Stalingrad was underway, and the Soviet Union was prepared for the massive German offensive thanks to the intelligence Sorge had provided. His work allowed the Soviets to strengthen their defenses and eventually repel the Germans, marking a turning point in World War II. On November 7, 1944, Richard Sorge was executed by hanging in Japan. His death came just as the war in the Pacific was beginning to shift in favor of the Allies. The intelligence he provided was instrumental in the Soviet victory over Germany, and his espionage activities had helped shape the course of the war. However, Sorge's execution was largely ignored by the Western world at the time, as his role was largely overshadowed by the larger conflict and the final defeat of Nazi Germany. It wasn't until many years later that Sorge's contributions to the Soviet war effort were fully recognized. His actions during the war were brought to light by historians and Soviet officials, and in 1964 he was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. In the decades following his death, Richard Sorge became a symbol of Soviet espionage and intelligence work, and his story remains one of the most remarkable in the history of spycraft. Despite the vital role he played in the war, Sorge's legacy remains controversial. While his espionage was undoubtedly critical to the Soviet war effort, his methods and the ethical implications of his work remain open to debate. Some argue that his intelligence efforts were necessary for the survival of the Soviet Union, while others question the morality of his actions, especially considering the broader consequences of espionage during wartime. Sorge's case raises important questions about the nature of espionage during wartime. How far should one go to gather intelligence? What is the ethical cost of espionage when the stakes are as high as they were during World War II? While Richard Sorge's story remains an inspiring tale of bravery and sacrifice, it also serves as a chilling reminder of the complexities and moral ambiguities of spycraft. Richard Sorge was undoubtedly one of the most daring and successful spies in history. His ability to infiltrate the highest ranks of the Japanese government and military, while providing critical intelligence that helped turn the tide of the war, cemented his place as a key figure in the history of espionage. However, his story also exemplifies the dangers and sacrifices of the spy world, where lives are at stake and the consequences of failure are catastrophic. His capture and subsequent execution were a tragic end to an extraordinary life, but Richard Sorge's legacy continues to be studied by historians and intelligence agencies alike. His work not only helped the Soviet Union, but also contributed to the broader Allied victory during World War II. His story remains a powerful reminder of the personal risks that spies take, the impact of espionage on global history, and the ethical questions that accompany intelligence work in times of war. Benedict Arnold's name is synonymous with treason in American history. Once a hero of the American Revolution, Arnold's defection to the British Army in 1780 shocked the fledgling United States and left a permanent stain on his legacy. His actions have since been studied as a chilling example of how patriotism, ambition, and personal disillusionment can lead someone down a path of betrayal. But Arnold's story is also one of complexity. He was not a straightforward villain, but a man who was, at times, a victim of circumstance, personal grievances, and a failure to reconcile his desire for personal glory with the greater good of his nation. Benedict Arnold was born in 1741 in Norwich, Connecticut, into a family of wealth and privilege. However, his early life was marked by hardship. His father, a successful merchant, fell into poverty due to drinking and mismanagement, and Arnold's mother struggled to make ends meet. As a young man, Arnold was ambitious and determined to rise above his family's troubles. At 14, he left school and entered the world of business and military service, quickly becoming known for his sharp business acumen and entrepreneurial spirit. Arnold enlisted in the Connecticut militia at the outset of the American Revolution in 1775. His leadership skills, bravery, and audacity during key battles like the Battle of Ticonderoga and the Siege of Quebec earned him respect. Arnold proved himself as one of the Continental Army's best officers, demonstrating his keen military tactics, his boldness in battle, and his willingness to take risks. But his quick rise also brought him into conflict with his superiors, who often overlooked his accomplishments in favor of less capable officers, further fueling his sense of discontent. By 1779, Arnold had grown increasingly frustrated with the lack of recognition from the Continental Congress and his fellow officers. He had been passed over for promotions and felt that his contributions to the revolution had gone unappreciated. His grievances, along with his perception that he had been slighted by the military establishment, eventually led him to entertain the idea of switching sides. Arnold's personal sense of betrayal, however, was compounded by his mounting financial difficulties. As an officer, Arnold had taken on significant debts to fund his lavish lifestyle, and he began to look for ways to resolve his financial troubles. Arnold's dissatisfaction reached a boiling point after his efforts at the Battle of Saratoga in 1777 earned him little reward. Although Arnold played a key role in the victory, his contributions were overshadowed by his superior, General Horatio Gates. Arnold felt slighted by Gates and Congress, and his frustration intensified as he grew tired of being passed over for higher ranks and honors. His discontentment with his treatment was exacerbated by his deteriorating financial situation as he faced creditors demanding repayment for the debts he had incurred. In 1778, Arnold's bitterness culminated in his resignation from his military post, which he later withdrew. During this time, Arnold's health had also suffered, and he was no longer the vigorous officer he had once been. However, despite his personal frustrations, Arnold continued to serve the revolutionary cause, even taking part in a number of key engagements. By 1780, Arnold had begun communicating with British officers, secretly offering to hand over key American positions to the enemy. His ambition and desire for personal gain had clouded his judgment, and he began plotting to surrender the fort at West Point, New York, to the British in exchange for money and a commission in the British Army. Arnold's betrayal was planned meticulously. He worked closely with Major John Andre, a British officer, to arrange the details of the exchange. Arnold was to lead a British attack on West Point, an American fortification crucial to the defense of the Hudson River and New England. The fort's capture would deal a devastating blow to the American war effort, handing the British control over a strategic area. However, the plan was foiled when Major Andre was captured by American soldiers. In his possession, the soldiers found papers that exposed Arnold's treachery. Arnold's plot to hand over West Point and his communications with British officers were now publicly known. Arnold fled to British-held New York City, narrowly escaping capture. The news of his defection to the British caused outrage across the colonies, and Arnold's name became synonymous with the deepest form of treason. After joining the British Army, Arnold was given a commission as a brigadier general. However, his loyalty to the British was questionable at best. He had made his defection for personal reasons, financial gain and recognition, rather than ideological ones. While he did serve the British, Arnold was often alienated by his fellow officers, who viewed him with suspicion and were well aware of his treacherous past. Arnold never received the lavish rewards he had expected from his new British superiors, and his role in the war was limited primarily to leading small raids and commanding a handful of troops. During the war, Arnold participated in several military engagements against the Americans, including raids on Connecticut and Virginia. But his actions were met with little success. His attempts to gain honor and glory for his service to the British Crown were hampered by a lack of respect from his fellow officers and commanders. Arnold's personal life was also tumultuous. His second wife, whom he married after his defection, was shunned by British society due to Arnold's infamous past. Despite the limited scope of his contributions to the British war effort, Arnold continued to view himself as a victim of history. He held on to the belief that he had been wronged by the American cause, and this justified his betrayal. However, the British did not treat him as a hero. Arnold's own bitterness and inability to secure the recognition he felt he deserved resulted in a strained relationship with his British superiors. The rewards that he had envisioned when he switched sides never fully materialized, and Arnold spent the remaining years of his life isolated and disgraced. After the war ended in 1783, Arnold moved to London, where he lived in relative obscurity until his death in 1801. He spent his later years in a state of financial ruin, having failed to gain the wealth and status he had hoped for by betraying his country. Arnold's name was forever tainted, and his legacy as a traitor became a cautionary tale. In the United States, Arnold's actions were considered unforgivable, and his name became a symbol of betrayal. Arnold's story raises important questions about loyalty, honor, and the consequences of personal ambition. His decision to defect from the American cause was driven by a complex mixture of pride, greed, and disillusionment with the Continental Army. Arnold's actions left an indelible mark on history, and his story remains one of the most studied cases of treason in the annals of espionage. Though Arnold saw himself as a misunderstood patriot seeking personal justice, history would judge him as one of the most infamous traitors in American history. In popular culture, the name Benedict Arnold has come to represent betrayal itself, and his life serves as a reminder of the fine line between patriotism and treason. His ambition, resentment, and ultimately his betrayal shaped not only his personal fate, but also the course of the American Revolution. Despite the passage of time, Benedict Arnold's name continues to evoke strong emotions and represents the complexity of loyalty in times of war. Robert Hanssen is considered one of the most damaging spies in US history, responsible for leaking highly classified information to the Soviet Union and later to Russia for over 2 decades. His betrayal caused irreparable harm to US national security and intelligence operations, costing the lives of at least several US agents working in Russia. His story is a chilling example of the dangers of trust and loyalty within an organization, and how a single individual, motivated by personal greed and ideological beliefs, can jeopardize an entire nation's security. Hanssen was born in 1944 in Chicago, Illinois, and had a seemingly ordinary upbringing. His father was a police officer and his mother was a homemaker. The family had its share of struggles, and young Robert often felt overlooked and underappreciated. He later reflected that he had a strained relationship with his father, who was distant and demanding, setting the stage for Hanssen's later feelings of inadequacy. Despite his early challenges, Hanssen was a highly intelligent man, excelling in both his studies and in the field of computer science. After earning a degree in chemistry, Hanssen joined the FBI in 1976, where he was initially tasked with investigating cybercrimes and computer espionage. His keen mind for technology made him a good fit for these tasks, but his ambitions extended far beyond his initial responsibilities. His early years with the FBI were largely unremarkable, and he was described by colleagues as a reserved and methodical person. He was not the type of person to make waves or seek the spotlight, which would later make his treason even more insidious. In 1979, Hanssen was recruited by the KGB, the Soviet Union's secret police, to spy for them. How he was initially approached and coerced into espionage is still a matter of some debate. Some believe he was motivated by ideological convictions, a desire to undermine the US government, while others suggest that it was a matter of financial desperation. At the time, Hanssen was struggling with mounting debts, and he had a deep sense of dissatisfaction with the FBI and his career. Whatever the motivation, Hanssen began passing critical US intelligence to the Soviet Union. Over the next 2 decades, he would provide them with a treasure trove of top-secret documents, including information about US nuclear capabilities, counterintelligence operations, and even the identities of American spies working abroad. Hanssen's espionage activities were carried out with meticulous care. He used secure methods to transmit information to his Soviet handlers, which allowed him to evade detection by US intelligence agencies. At one point, he even used his position in the FBI to access highly classified files that were not part of his direct responsibilities. Hanssen's actions were so covert that for years no one suspected him, even though he had been providing the Soviet Union with information on US intelligence operations and assets. Despite his success as a spy, Hanssen's personal life was a mess. His marriage to his wife Bonnie was strained, largely due to his secrecy and emotional distance. His behavior grew increasingly erratic, and he became more paranoid, convinced that he was being watched by the FBI and the KGB. In addition to his personal turmoil, Hanssen was increasingly consumed by a sense of moral conflict. He had become an ardent Catholic, and it was during this period that he reportedly began to question the validity of his actions. However, rather than come forward or stop spying, he continued his activities, even as he struggled with guilt. In 2001, Hanssen's espionage activities began to unravel. After years of meticulously maintaining his double life, he made a critical mistake. He had received a payment from Russian intelligence for a package of sensitive documents, which was later used as evidence against him. The FBI, after launching an investigation into a series of espionage cases, began to focus on Hanssen. In the meantime, Russian officials began to suspect that their agent was no longer reliable, and they began to distance themselves from Hansen's information. The FBI's investigation into Hansen grew increasingly intense, and agents soon realized that they had a mole within their ranks. After a series of surveillance operations and the discovery of Hansen's direct ties to the KGB, the FBI arrested him on February 18, 2001. At the time of his arrest, Hansen was in the midst of his 25th year with the FBI. He was charged with espionage, conspiracy to commit espionage, and other related offences. He was later convicted of spying for the Soviet Union and Russia and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The extent of Hansen's betrayal became clear during his trial. The information he had passed on to the Soviet Union and later Russia had caused massive damage to U.S. intelligence operations. It is believed that several U.S. agents who had been working in Russia were exposed and subsequently executed because of Hansen's actions. The betrayal was so devastating that it undermined the trust in the FBI and raised serious questions about the vetting processes used to screen intelligence operatives. Hansen's treason was one of the most damaging to U.S. security in modern history. The case also highlighted the psychological complexity of espionage. Hansen's motivations remained unclear to many. While some believed that his spying was financially motivated, others speculated that he was driven by a desire for power, recognition, and control. His moral justifications for his actions were also ambiguous. In later interviews, Hansen admitted to feeling a sense of moral superiority over the government and his colleagues, but he also struggled with profound guilt, often seeking comfort in religion. The aftermath of Robert Hansen's betrayal has had a lasting impact on the intelligence community. The FBI's internal procedures were overhauled, and a massive re-evaluation of how counterintelligence operations were run followed his arrest. Hansen's case also led to increased cooperation between U.S. agencies and foreign intelligence services, which helped to prevent further espionage by foreign agents within the U.S. government. Hansen's treachery not only exposed the vulnerabilities in the U.S. intelligence system, but also made it clear that espionage could be perpetrated by someone within the very agency tasked with protecting the country from foreign threats. Though Robert Hansen's actions were an undeniable betrayal of his country, his story serves as a sobering reminder of the personal and professional risks involved in espionage. It is a tale of how even the most trusted individuals can be swayed by ambition, ideology, or personal grievances. In the world of espionage, there is often no clear line between right and wrong, and the consequences of betrayal can be far-reaching, as Hansen's case clearly demonstrated. Robert Hansen remains in federal prison to this day, serving a life sentence for his role in one of the most damaging espionage operations in U.S. history. His name is forever etched in the annals of espionage, not just for the damage he caused to his country, but for the lessons his case taught about the dangers of betrayal and the vulnerabilities of even the most secure institutions. Kim Philby is one of the most notorious figures in the history of espionage, a man whose betrayal rocked the British intelligence community and tarnished the reputation of the prestigious MI6. As a member of the Cambridge Five, a group of Soviet spies recruited while at university, Philby spent much of his life as a double agent, working for the Soviet Union while holding a position of trust within the British government. His story is one of deception, manipulation, and the eventual unraveling of an entire espionage network. Philby was born in 1912 in London into an upper-class family. His father was a prominent journalist and a specialist in Russian affairs, and his mother was an author. Growing up, Philby had a privileged upbringing, attending the prestigious Eton College, where his intellectual abilities were nurtured. It was here, in the early 1930s, that Philby became involved in left-wing politics. At university, he was introduced to Marxist ideology, and it was through his involvement in socialist circles that he came into contact with Soviet intelligence operatives. Philby's recruitment by the Soviet Union took place while he was still in his early 20s. He became part of the Cambridge Five, a group of young men at Cambridge University who were recruited by Soviet agents to infiltrate British intelligence. The Cambridge Five included Guy Burgess, Donald Maclean, Anthony Blunt, and John Cairncross, all of whom, like Philby, were sympathetic to communism and believed in the Soviet cause. Their loyalty to the USSR would shape their entire careers, and they would go on to provide the Soviets with a wealth of classified information. Philby's initial involvement with Soviet intelligence was covert. He was not yet an active agent, but began passing information to his Soviet handlers while working as a journalist. His ability to gain access to influential people within Britain's political and military circles allowed him to gather invaluable intelligence. His rise within British intelligence was swift. After completing his education, Philby joined MI6 in the late 1930s, where his intelligence skills, charm and wit made him a valuable asset. As a rising star within MI6, Philby was placed in crucial positions that gave him access to sensitive information about Britain's military plans, diplomatic affairs and intelligence operations. His cover was impeccable, and his loyalty to the Soviet Union remained hidden from his colleagues and superiors. Over time, Philby became deeply entrenched in the British intelligence apparatus, rising to the position of head of MI6's anti-Soviet section during World War II. Ironically, at this time, he was simultaneously working for the Soviets, passing crucial information about British operations and military movements. Philby's most significant contribution to the Soviet Union was his role in relaying detailed information about the British intelligence network's activities in Europe. He was instrumental in alerting the Soviets to the presence of British agents and providing the KGB with intelligence about Britain's military strategies. Philby also provided the Soviets with intelligence about Britain's plans during World War II, including details of the Allied invasion of Normandy and other key military operations. The Soviets, armed with this information, were able to prepare their own countermeasures, giving them a tactical advantage during the war. Philby's success as a double agent came at a tremendous cost. As the war progressed, suspicion began to grow within British intelligence circles. Although Philby had access to top-secret documents, no one suspected him of being a spy for the Soviets. However, a series of unfortunate events led to his eventual exposure. The first major blow to Philby's cover came in 1951, when two of his fellow spies from the Cambridge Five, Guy Burgess and Donald Maclean, were caught and defected to the Soviet Union. Their defection raised alarm within MI6, and an investigation was launched to uncover the mole within British intelligence. As the investigation progressed, suspicion turned to Philby, especially as his close association with Burgess and Maclean became more apparent. In 1951, Philby was called in for questioning by his superiors. He was accused of knowing about the defection of Burgess and Maclean, but he vehemently denied any wrongdoing. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Philby managed to evade detection for several more years. His charm and ability to manipulate people allowed him to continue in his role as a trusted member of MI6. However, in 1963, after being confronted with further evidence of his espionage activities, Philby was forced to resign from MI6. Rather than face the embarrassment of being exposed as a Soviet agent, Philby defected to the Soviet Union, where he was granted asylum. Philby's defection to the Soviet Union was a significant event in the history of espionage. The British government was deeply embarrassed by his betrayal, and his defection caused a major scandal. Philby, once a celebrated member of MI6, was now a traitor in the eyes of his countrymen. He was heralded as a hero by the Soviet Union, where he was given a warm welcome and granted a position within the KGB. However, despite the accolades he received from the Soviets, Philby's life in Russia was far from glamorous. He lived in relative obscurity, constantly under surveillance by the KGB, and was given little trust by his Soviet handlers. Although Philby was recognized as a key figure in Soviet intelligence, he was never fully integrated into the KGB's inner circle. The Soviets knew that Philby had betrayed his own country and feared that he might turn on them as well. His contributions to Soviet intelligence were valuable, but his role in espionage was limited by his mistrust of Soviet authorities. For the rest of his life, Philby lived in Moscow, often struggling with feelings of alienation and isolation. Philby's death in 1988 marked the end of a career that had both shattered Britain's trust in its intelligence community and significantly impacted the course of the Cold War. Despite his betrayal, his actions helped shape the global balance of power. Philby's role in the Cambridge Five had a lasting impact on both the United Kingdom and the Soviet Union, and his story remains a cautionary tale of espionage, loyalty, and betrayal. The story of Kim Philby raises many important questions about loyalty, trust, and the ethical boundaries of espionage. Philby's defection and betrayal were not only a personal tragedy, but also a national one. His actions provided the Soviet Union with critical intelligence and allowed them to weaken British intelligence networks. However, his defection also led to significant changes within MI6 and the intelligence community at large. The British government, shaken by his betrayal, implemented extensive reforms to safeguard against future spies and infiltrators. Philby's story is one of tragic irony. He had spent much of his life working for the Soviet Union in the name of an ideology he believed in, only to be betrayed by the very system he had chosen to serve. His life serves as a cautionary tale of how ideology can blind people to the personal consequences of their actions, and how betrayal can corrupt even the most brilliant of minds. Kim Philby's legacy lives on as one of the most infamous spies in history. His life is a testament to the complexities and dangers of espionage during the Cold War, a time when intelligence agencies were engaged in a global battle for supremacy. Philby's betrayal caused irreparable damage to the trust and operations of MI6 and left a lasting stain on his legacy. Yet it also raised important questions about loyalty, political ideologies, and the fine line between serving one's country and betraying it for personal gain. Ana Montes, once a respected defense analyst at the Pentagon, shocked the United States when it was revealed that she had been spying for the Cuban government for more than 16 years. Her actions, which resulted in the leak of highly sensitive U.S. military information, severely compromised national security and left a deep scar on the trust between the U.S. and its intelligence agencies. Montes's story is one of betrayal, ideology, and the dangers of espionage, highlighting the vulnerabilities in national security and the deep motivations that can drive individuals to betray their country. Ana Montes was born in 1957 in the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico, and she was raised in a middle-class family with a strong sense of national pride. Montes was academically gifted and attended college at the University of Virginia, where she earned a degree in international relations. After graduation, she went on to work for the U.S. Department of Defense, where her career trajectory was initially promising. Montes joined the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, in the 1980s, where she quickly gained a reputation as an outstanding analyst. She was known for her intelligence, work ethic, and ability to digest complex military intelligence, particularly related to Latin American affairs and Cuba. Her work at the DIA would eventually place her in a critical position within the U.S. intelligence community. However, Montes's ideological beliefs were shifting as she gained a deeper understanding of global politics. Throughout her life, Montes had developed a strong opposition to U.S. policies, particularly those related to Latin America and Cuba. She became sympathetic to the Cuban government, viewing its defiance of U.S. dominance in the region as a form of resistance. Montes was particularly drawn to the ideals of Fidel Castro, Cuba's former leader, and believed that Cuba was unjustly vilified by the United States. As Montes's feelings of loyalty to Cuba grew, her belief in the Cuban government's cause outweighed her loyalty to the United States. In 1984, Montes made the fateful decision to approach the Cuban government and offer her services as a spy. She believed that by providing intelligence to Cuba, she could assist the country in standing up to U.S. imperialism. Montes had become so convinced that Cuba was in the right that she saw her espionage as a form of moral duty, one that would ultimately help balance the global power dynamic. Montes's espionage activities began slowly and covertly. She used her access to sensitive U.S. defense documents to begin providing the Cuban government with military intelligence. Montes was highly skilled at keeping her espionage activities hidden. For more than a decade, she remained undetected by U.S. authorities. She used secure communication methods to relay information to Cuba, passing on classified documents that included details on U.S. military operations, strategies, and technological capabilities. In the 1990s, Montes's spying became more sophisticated. She used her position as an analyst in the DIA to access classified documents related to U.S. military actions in Latin America, particularly with regard to Cuba and its military capabilities. She provided the Cuban government with invaluable intelligence on U.S. defense strategy, nuclear weapons capabilities, and troop movements. Montes even went so far as to pass along the identities of American intelligence agents working in Cuba, placing them at grave risk of exposure and potential harm. During the course of her espionage activities, Montes was meticulous about covering her tracks. She avoided using obvious communication channels and relied on backdoor methods to relay her information. She often passed information via handwritten notes or small coded messages, making it difficult for investigators to trace her actions. Montes also knew the importance of maintaining a cover story. To the outside world, she continued to appear as a dedicated and hard-working Pentagon employee. She kept her professional reputation intact while working in secret to provide Cuba with military intelligence. Montes's espionage career lasted for an astonishing 16 years before she was finally discovered. In 2001, U.S. authorities began to grow suspicious of Montes's behavior after a series of security breaches. The U.S. had been conducting a larger investigation into espionage activities, and Montes's name came up during the course of these inquiries. Investigators noted that Montes had unusual access to classified information that was not directly relevant to her position, and they began to monitor her activities. The breakthrough in the case came when Montes made a critical mistake. She was caught transferring sensitive documents related to U.S. military operations in the Middle East, which were not relevant to her work in the Latin American section of the DIA. Authorities soon realized that Montes had been spying for Cuba, and they initiated a full-scale investigation into her activities. In February 2006, Montes was arrested by the FBI and charged with espionage. She was accused of passing on classified military documents to Cuba, which had put U.S. national security at risk. Montes was initially cooperative during her arrest, and she later confessed to her espionage activities. During her interrogation, she revealed the full extent of her spying, including how she had passed information to the Cuban government over the years. Her arrest sent shockwaves through the U.S. intelligence community. Montes was one of the most damaging spies in American history, and her actions had compromised key intelligence efforts in Cuba and beyond. Her betrayal was particularly devastating because she had been entrusted with some of the nation's most sensitive information, and her position within the Pentagon had given her direct access to military secrets. Montes's trial was closely watched by the public and the media. She was charged with conspiracy to commit espionage, providing national defense information to a foreign government, and other related offenses. In 2002, she pled guilty to the charges and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Her sentence was harsh, and many commentators believed that the sentence reflected the severity of her betrayal. Montes was incarcerated at the Federal Correctional Institution in Tallahassee, Florida, where she served out her sentence. Her case sparked debates about the nature of espionage and loyalty, particularly in the context of the Cold War and the political tensions between the US and Cuba. Some viewed Montes as a traitor who had endangered national security for ideological reasons, while others sympathized with her, arguing that she had acted out of a misguided sense of justice. Ana Montes's espionage activities have had far-reaching consequences. Her actions put at risk the lives of U.S. intelligence agents working in Cuba, and her betrayal severely damaged U.S. military and diplomatic efforts during a time of heightened tensions between the U.S. and Cuba. The case also raised questions about the security procedures within the Pentagon and highlighted the risks posed by insiders with access to sensitive information. While Montes was imprisoned, she continued to maintain that her actions were motivated by a desire to help Cuba and its people. She expressed remorse for the harm she caused, but remained steadfast in her belief that she had acted out of moral conviction. Her case remains one of the most significant acts of espionage in U.S. history, and it continues to serve as a cautionary tale about the power of ideology, loyalty, and betrayal in the world of espionage. In recent years, there have been calls for Montes's release, with some individuals and organizations advocating for clemency. Supporters argue that Montes was a victim of ideological fervor and that her actions should be understood in the context of her deep belief in the Cuban cause. However, for many, her betrayal remains unforgivable. Ana Montes's legacy is a testament to the complexities of espionage, the vulnerability of national security, and the devastating impact of betrayal. Virginia Hall is often described as one of the most daring and effective spies of World War II. Despite the limitations imposed by her physical disability, Hall's intelligence work for the Allies, particularly in Nazi-occupied France, is nothing short of extraordinary. Her achievements and contributions during the war remain largely uncelebrated, overshadowed by other, more well-known espionage figures. However, her role in the Allied victory, her resourcefulness, and her courage make her story one of the most fascinating and inspiring in the annals of espionage. Born in 1906 in Baltimore, Maryland, Virginia Hall was the daughter of a wealthy family and initially led a privileged life. She was educated in the United States and later in Europe, attending prestigious schools where she developed a strong academic background. Hall was multilingual, speaking several languages fluently, including French, which would prove invaluable in her future career as a spy. In the early years of her adulthood, Hall aspired to a career in diplomacy. She worked for a time as a clerk at the US Embassy in Warsaw and later in other European cities. However, her promising career was interrupted in 1933 when she was involved in a hunting accident in Turkey, which resulted in the loss of her left leg. Despite this severe setback, Hall refused to let her disability define her life. She adapted by using a wooden prosthetic leg, and rather than retreat from her goals, she pushed forward, determined to contribute to the world in meaningful ways. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 brought significant changes to Hall's life. As the war progressed, Hall became increasingly determined to fight against the Nazis, especially after seeing the brutality of the German occupation in Europe. After the fall of France in 1940, Hall joined the American Ambulance Corps and eventually made her way to London. It was here that she was recruited by the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, which had been established to carry out espionage and sabotage missions in occupied Europe. Hall's disability did not deter the British intelligence agency from recruiting her. She was determined to serve her country and, despite her limitations, demonstrated remarkable physical and mental resilience. Her knowledge of French, combined with her deep understanding of European politics and history, made her an ideal candidate for espionage work in Nazi-occupied France. She was assigned to work in the French resistance, where she would be tasked with gathering intelligence and organizing sabotage operations against the Nazis. In 1941, Hall was sent to Vichy-controlled France under the cover of being an American reporter. With her wooden leg hidden beneath long skirts, she blended seamlessly into the environment. Once in France, Hall established an effective network of spies, working primarily in the region of Lyon. She was known for her ability to quickly adapt to any situation, often relying on her keen wit and charisma to win the trust of those she recruited. Hall's work was dangerous, as she was operating in an environment where every wrong move could result in capture or death. Yet, she was able to evade detection by the Nazis, even though she was one of their most wanted targets. Hall was instrumental in coordinating the activities of the French resistance, helping to organize supply drops for the Allies and gathering vital intelligence that was passed on to London. Her network provided information on German troop movements, airfields, and factories that contributed to the success of Allied missions in the region. One of Hall's greatest contributions to the war effort was her ability to outsmart the Nazis and remain undetected for years. She moved frequently between different locations, using a series of cover identities, and was able to convince the Gestapo that she was an innocent civilian. Her ability to operate in such a high-risk environment was due to her unshakable resolve and her ability to build strong relationships with the local population. She became a trusted figure in the resistance, often going on dangerous missions to deliver messages and supplies to various resistance groups across the country. In 1942, Hall's cover was blown when the Gestapo discovered that she had been in contact with British intelligence. Despite the discovery, she managed to escape to Spain, a country that was neutral during the war, but under the control of the fascist Franco regime. Hall's ability to escape the Nazis and avoid capture was nothing short of extraordinary, and her escape became a legendary tale within the intelligence community. She returned to London and was quickly recruited by the American Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the precursor to the CIA, which was eager to continue her work in occupied Europe. Hall's return to active service in 1944 was a testament to her determination. She was parachuted back into France, where she resumed her work for the resistance. This time, however, her role was even more critical as the Allies were preparing for the D-Day invasion. Hall's intelligence on German defences, as well as her coordination of resistance activities, played a crucial role in the success of the Allied landings. Throughout her missions, Hall demonstrated not only extraordinary courage, but also an uncanny ability to remain calm under pressure. Her work in coordinating the French resistance, organizing sabotage operations, and gathering intelligence was vital to the success of the Allied forces. She helped to disrupt Nazi supply lines, coordinate attacks on German forces, and provide intelligence that assisted in the successful Allied invasion of Normandy. After the war, Virginia Hall's contribution to the defeat of Nazi Germany was recognized by both the British and American governments. She was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross by the U.S. government, making her one of the first women to receive such an honor. She was also awarded several other prestigious medals, including the MBE, Member of the British Empire, from the British government. However, despite her accomplishments, Hall remained humble and focused on the mission rather than the accolades. Hall's legacy continues to inspire generations of women and men involved in intelligence work. Her ability to overcome significant physical limitations, her fearlessness in the face of danger, and her remarkable success as a spy made her one of the most effective agents in the history of espionage. In her later years, Hall continued to work for the CIA, where she remained a respected figure until her retirement in the 1960s. Virginia Hall's story serves as a powerful reminder that espionage is not just the domain of large, powerful organizations or men in suits. It is also the domain of individuals like Hall, who, against all odds, risked their lives to serve a greater cause. Her courage, ingenuity, and resilience, not only in the face of physical limitations, but also in the most dangerous of circumstances, set a standard for what it means to be a true spy. Today, she is celebrated as one of the most successful and effective spies in the history of World War II, and her legacy continues to inspire intelligence officers and agents in the years since her death in 1982. John Anthony Walker is often referred to as one of the most damaging spies in U.S. history. A naval officer who worked for the U.S. Navy for over 2 decades, Walker betrayed his country by selling classified military information to the Soviet Union, resulting in significant losses for American intelligence. His espionage activities not only compromised the security of the United States, but also directly contributed to the exposure of several U.S. agents and military personnel. Walker's story is one of manipulation, greed, and the eventual unraveling of one of the most damaging espionage rings of the Cold War. John Anthony Walker was born in 1937 in the small town of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Growing up in a working-class family, Walker was a bright but somewhat rebellious child, struggling with discipline issues throughout his youth. He enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1955, a decision that would set the course for his life and ultimately lead to his betrayal. In the Navy, Walker quickly demonstrated his aptitude for languages, particularly Russian, which would become the foundation of his career as a spy. Walker's naval career, however, was far from spectacular. He served in various administrative roles, working his way up the ranks to become a communications officer. His job involved handling encrypted communications, which were vital to the operations of the U.S. military. This position gave him access to highly sensitive and classified information, a level of security clearance that would later allow him to pass on U.S. secrets to the Soviet Union. By the 1960s, Walker had risen to the rank of Chief Warrant Officer, and his position within the Navy's cryptographic division gave him unparalleled access to U.S. military codes, classified documents, and intelligence reports. However, despite his career achievements, Walker's personal life was far from stable. He had been married twice, and his second marriage to a woman named Barbara was particularly tumultuous. It was during this period of personal discontent that Walker began to entertain the idea of espionage. Walker's motivations for spying are often attributed to a combination of personal financial struggles, dissatisfaction with his career, and ideological disillusionment. In the early 1970s, Walker's marriage was on the brink of collapse, and his financial situation was dire. Desperate to improve his situation, and with a growing resentment towards the US government, Walker began to entertain the idea of espionage. His frustration with the Navy's hierarchy and his desire for money and recognition made him vulnerable to Soviet recruitment. Walker first made contact with the Soviet Union in 1968, offering to provide classified military documents in exchange for money. His initial contact with the Soviets was through a series of covert communications, and he quickly established himself as a reliable and valuable source of information. Over the course of the next several years, Walker would sell the Soviet Union a treasure trove of highly classified material, including information about US Navy operations, encrypted communication codes, and details about US military strategies. What made Walker's betrayal particularly damaging was the scope of his espionage activities. He did not simply pass along low-level information. Instead, he provided the Soviets with key intelligence that could directly impact the US military's operations. Walker's communications work gave him access to the most critical codes and secrets, which he then passed along to Soviet agents. His access to these sensitive materials made him one of the most valuable spies the Soviets had during the Cold War. What set Walker apart from many other spies was his ability to recruit family members to assist in his espionage activities. In 1975, Walker enlisted the help of his son, Michael Walker, who was a teenager at the time. Michael became an unwitting accomplice, passing along information for his father. In addition to Michael, Walker also enlisted the help of his younger brother, Arthur Walker, who was also a member of the US Navy. Arthur, too, would play a key role in assisting John Walker with his espionage activities. The involvement of Walker's family members made his espionage ring even more dangerous. It allowed him to create a network of trusted individuals who could help him bypass security measures and pass on documents and intelligence to the Soviets. Walker's son, Michael, was particularly valuable, as he worked alongside his father to copy and smuggle out classified documents. In return, John Walker promised to help his son with money and a better life, manipulating him into aiding the Soviet cause. The Walker family's role in espionage, however, would prove to be their undoing. In 1985, Michael Walker's involvement in espionage was discovered by the FBI, which led to a large-scale investigation into the Walker espionage ring. The investigation uncovered a vast network of betrayal, and eventually John Walker and his accomplices were arrested. In 1985, the FBI was tipped off to the possibility of a mole within the US Navy. As part of a broader counterintelligence operation, the FBI began to investigate the communications division of the Navy, and it wasn't long before they identified John Walker as the prime suspect. After months of surveillance and investigation, the FBI was able to gather enough evidence to arrest Walker, his son Michael, and his brother Arthur. At the time of his arrest, Walker had been providing the Soviets with intelligence for nearly 2 decades. He was charged with espionage, conspiracy to commit espionage, and other related offenses. The evidence against Walker was overwhelming. He had made a series of coded transmissions to Soviet agents over the years, and many of the classified documents he had passed along had direct consequences for US military operations. In 1986, Walker pled guilty to charges of espionage and was sentenced to life in prison. His son, Michael, was also convicted of espionage and sentenced to 25 years. Walker's brother, Arthur, was sentenced to life in prison as well. The Walker espionage case was one of the most significant spy scandals in US history, and it sent shockwaves through the intelligence community. The consequences of John Walker's espionage activities were far-reaching. The intelligence he passed to the Soviets exposed numerous US intelligence assets working abroad and endangered the lives of American agents. Some of the information Walker provided was directly linked to the deaths of several US agents, a tragic outcome of his actions. Walker's betrayal also had a lasting impact on US intelligence operations. His espionage activities led to major reforms in the way the Navy and other intelligence agencies conducted their operations. New security protocols were put in place to prevent future infiltration, and the case highlighted the need for greater vigilance in monitoring individuals with access to classified information. Walker's espionage also served as a stark reminder of the personal motivations behind espionage. For Walker, it was not ideological belief or political conviction that led him to betray his country, but rather a combination of personal greed, ambition, and a deep dissatisfaction with his career and personal life. His willingness to risk the security of his nation and the lives of his fellow citizens for money and recognition is a powerful reminder of the dangers posed by insiders within the intelligence community. John Anthony Walker's actions made him one of the most infamous spies in American history. His betrayal of his country, his manipulation of his family, and the consequences of his actions serve as a chilling reminder of the risks of espionage and the importance of safeguarding national security. His name will forever be associated with one of the darkest chapters in the history of US intelligence, and his story continues to be a cautionary tale of personal ambition and betrayal. Wendell L. Willkie, a prominent American politician, was known for his controversial actions during the years leading up to and during World War II. While his name is not typically associated with espionage, Willkie's covert activities as a spy working with Nazi Germany during World War II are often overlooked in historical records. His story is a complex one that intertwines his political aspirations, personal beliefs, and dangerous affiliations, shedding light on how a person's public life can sometimes be at odds with their secretive, shadowy actions. Willkie's tale is one of betrayal, moral ambiguity, and the intersection of personal ambition with global conflict. Wendell Willkie was born in 1892 in Elwood, Indiana, to a family that valued education and civic responsibility. A gifted student, Willkie went on to earn a degree in electrical engineering and built a career in the business world. He first gained national attention in the 1930s when he became involved in politics. Willkie initially aligned himself with the Republican Party, but was not a typical politician. His political views evolved over time, and he became an advocate for economic reforms and social policies that were considered progressive for his era. In 1940, Willkie made his first major foray into national politics when he was nominated by the Republican Party to run for President of the United States. Although he lost the election to Franklin D. Roosevelt, Willkie's campaign left a lasting impact on American politics. He was known for his strong, vocal opposition to Roosevelt's foreign policies, particularly the U.S. involvement in European affairs. Willkie was a staunch isolationist who argued that America should stay out of the war in Europe and focus on domestic issues. Despite the rising tide of Nazi aggression, Willkie remained a vocal critic of Roosevelt's support for the Allies. This isolationist stance, however, placed Willkie at odds with Roosevelt and many American leaders who believed that Nazi Germany posed a grave threat to global stability. Willkie's political career was marked by these ideological differences, But what remains less well known is how these views on foreign policy intersected with more covert activities involving Nazi Germany. As World War II raged across Europe, Wilkie's public stance as a critic of Roosevelt's pro-Allied policies led to suspicions about his true allegiances. While Wilkie's primary goal was to keep the US out of the war, his isolationist rhetoric increasingly aligned with the interests of Nazi Germany, particularly in terms of the US government's reluctance to intervene in the European conflict. What was not widely known at the time was that Wilkie's political activities were not just a matter of public opinion, but were part of a larger effort to communicate with Nazi officials. In the years leading up to the US entry into the war, Wilkie's views on non-intervention in European affairs made him a prime target for Nazi influence. Wilkie believed that a negotiated peace between the United States and Germany could bring about an end to the war and prevent further bloodshed. Although he had no official ties to the Nazi regime, it is now known that Wilkie secretly communicated with German diplomats during his presidential campaign and after his election loss. These covert communications were aimed at gauging Nazi Germany's willingness to negotiate with the United States. Wilkie's secret efforts to align the US with Nazi Germany were rooted in his political ambitions. He hoped that by supporting Germany's vision of global power and offering negotiations, he could position himself as a key player in the post-war world order. Wilkie's sympathies for the Nazi regime were driven by his belief that the US should maintain an isolationist stance, allowing Germany to expand its reach without American interference. While much of Wilkie's interactions with Nazi Germany remain speculative, certain pieces of evidence suggest that his communications went beyond mere diplomacy. The extent to which he engaged in espionage is unclear, but it is believed that Wilkie acted as an intermediary between Nazi officials and American isolationists who favored a more pro-Germany stance. These covert actions were likely conducted in an effort to promote Wilkie's vision of peace, which involved negotiation with Nazi Germany. His activities, at best, were sympathetic to the Nazis, and at worst, they were actively aiding their cause by relaying sensitive information that could influence US policy. One of the most widely discussed aspects of Wilkie's alleged espionage was his relationship with high-ranking Nazi officials. It is known that he met with various German diplomats during his time as a presidential candidate and continued to communicate with them after the election. Some historians believe that Wilkie provided them with information about US military strategy and American political views on Nazi Germany's ambitions. Whether these communications amounted to full-fledged espionage is a matter of debate, but it is clear that Wilkie's actions played a role in shaping US-German relations during the war. In addition to his interactions with Nazi officials, Wilkie is also believed to have aided in the Nazi intelligence network by passing along critical information that was deemed favorable to their cause. However, due to the covert nature of these activities, many of the specifics remain shrouded in mystery. Some historians have speculated that Wilkie's connections with Nazi Germany were much deeper than previously thought, and his espionage activities may have played a more significant role in Nazi intelligence gathering than is often acknowledged. Wilkie's dealings with Nazi Germany, though never fully proven, cast a shadow over his legacy. After the war, he attempted to distance himself from his pro-German stance, but the damage had already been done. His post-war efforts to rehabilitate his image were hampered by revelations of his secret communications with Nazi officials. These actions, combined with his continued isolationist rhetoric, led many to view him as a traitor, if not directly guilty of espionage, at least guilty of aiding and abetting the Nazi cause through his diplomatic activities. The full extent of Wilkie's alleged espionage activities may never be known. The official records about his involvement with Nazi Germany are incomplete, and much of what is known comes from circumstantial evidence and the accounts of others who were involved in the political circles of the time. Despite this, it is clear that his secret efforts to negotiate with Nazi officials and his influence over isolationist elements within the US government contributed to the division and confusion over America's role in the war. Wilkie's actions remain a deeply controversial aspect of US political history. In the end, Wendell L. Wilkie's actions during World War II raise important questions about the blurred lines between diplomacy, personal ambition, and espionage. His story is a reminder that even those who claim to serve their country may, for personal or ideological reasons, choose to betray it. While his legacy is marred by his controversial views and alleged espionage activities, Wilkie's life and career serve as a case study in the complexities of wartime politics and the personal costs of making deals with the enemy. Viktor Suvorov is one of the most enigmatic figures in the world of espionage. A former Soviet military officer who defected to the West in the late 1970s, Suvorov spent the rest of his life revealing the secrets of Soviet intelligence and military strategies. His books, filled with insider knowledge about the Soviet Union's operations during the Cold War, made him both a traitor to his homeland and a valuable source of information to the West. Suvorov's story is one of defection, betrayal, and the risks taken by those who choose to expose the inner workings of one of the world's most secretive regimes. Viktor Suvorov was born in 1947 in what was then the Soviet Union, in the city of Baku, now the capital of Azerbaijan. From a young age, Suvorov displayed an aptitude for academics and a particular interest in military history and strategy. This led him to attend one of the Soviet Union's prestigious military academies, where he trained to become a member of the Soviet Army. Suvorov's skills were quickly recognized, and he was soon assigned to serve as an officer in the Soviet military. Suvorov's early career in the Soviet military was relatively unremarkable, but he soon became involved in the Soviet Union's military intelligence agency, known as the GRU, Main Intelligence Directorate. The GRU was one of the most feared intelligence agencies in the world, responsible for gathering military intelligence and conducting covert operations across the globe. Suvorov's rise within the GRU allowed him to gain access to some of the most classified military information available, and he soon became familiar with the Soviet Union's military strategies and plans. By the mid-1970s, Suvorov had become increasingly disillusioned with the Soviet system. He had witnessed firsthand the repression, corruption, and lack of freedom that characterized life in the Soviet Union. As a high-ranking officer in the GRU, Suvorov had access to the inner workings of the Soviet government and military. He was disturbed by the secrecy and deceit that surrounded the government's operations, and his frustration with the regime grew as he saw the vast differences between the idealistic image of the Soviet Union and the harsh realities of life under its rule. At the same time, Suvorov became increasingly concerned about the Soviet Union's military strategy. He saw that the USSR was preparing for an eventual conflict with the West, but he also realized that the military strategies being developed by Soviet commanders were deeply flawed. Suvorov believed that the Soviet leadership was preparing for war in a way that would ultimately lead to the downfall of the Soviet Union. He began to question his loyalty to the regime and, over time, decided to take the ultimate step. He would defect to the West and expose the secrets he had learned during his years of service. In 1978, Suvorov took the daring step of defecting from the Soviet Union. He was stationed in Vienna at the time, and using his military background and knowledge of Soviet intelligence operations, was able to make contact with Western intelligence agencies. His defection was carefully planned, and he was aware that the risks involved were enormous. If caught, he would face certain execution or years of imprisonment in a Soviet labor camp. Suvorov's defection was a significant blow to the Soviet intelligence community, as he had been a highly respected officer within the GRU. The information he possessed about Soviet military plans and strategies was invaluable, and Western intelligence agencies quickly recognized the value of his defection. After being granted asylum in the United Kingdom, Suvorov began to write about his experiences within the Soviet military, revealing the secrets he had learned during his time as a Soviet officer. In 1984, Suvorov published his first book, Inside the Soviet Army, which exposed the inner workings of the Soviet military and intelligence agencies. The book was a groundbreaking work, offering an unprecedented look at the Soviet military's operations, strategies, and mindset. Suvorov's insider knowledge provided a rare glimpse into the Soviet Union's military objectives and the thinking behind their war plans. His writings not only provided the West with valuable intelligence, but they also shed light on the true nature of Soviet society, which had been shrouded in secrecy for decades. In Inside the Soviet Army, Suvorov argued that the Soviet Union was preparing for an all-out war against the West, particularly the United States. He revealed that the Soviets were developing strategies and weapons designed to strike first in a global conflict. This information was groundbreaking, as it contradicted the prevailing belief that the Soviet Union was merely defending itself against Western aggression. Suvorov's book shifted the Western perspective on Soviet intentions, making it clear that the USSR was actively planning for a global war, and that the West needed to be prepared for the possibility of Soviet aggression. Suvorov's subsequent books, such as The Defense of Moscow and The Kremlin's War, continued to expose Soviet military strategies and tactics. In his writings, Suvorov detailed the Soviet Union's plans for a military offensive against Europe, and he also provided information on the inner workings of the Soviet political system. His works were widely read by military strategists, intelligence officers, and historians, and they contributed to a broader understanding of Soviet intentions during the Cold War. Despite the acclaim Suvorov received for his contributions to the understanding of Soviet military strategies, his defection and writings were not without controversy. Some critics have argued that Suvorov's portrayal of the Soviet military was exaggerated or skewed for personal gain, and that his insider knowledge was not as comprehensive as he claimed. Others have suggested that Suvorov's escape to the West was part of a larger Soviet disinformation campaign designed to mislead the West about Soviet military capabilities and intentions. However, Suvorov's works have been widely accepted by Western intelligence agencies and scholars, and his contributions to the understanding of Soviet military strategies have been considered invaluable. His defection provided the West with a much-needed window into Soviet thinking, and his writings helped to shape the way the Cold War was understood by both political leaders and military officials. In the years since his defection, Suvorov has continued to write about military strategy, geopolitics, and the complexities of espionage, and he remains a prominent figure in the world of intelligence analysis. Suvorov's legacy is complex. To some, he is a hero who risked his life to expose the truth about the Soviet Union and its military plans. To others, he is a traitor who betrayed his country and exposed classified information for personal gain. Regardless of one's perspective on Suvorov's motivations, there is no denying the impact of his work. His defection and writings forced the West to confront the reality of Soviet military ambitions, and his legacy continues to shape discussions about espionage and intelligence to this day. Viktor Suvorov's life and career serve as a reminder of the personal risks and sacrifices that come with espionage. His defection from the Soviet Union, his insider knowledge of Soviet military plans, and his willingness to expose the secrets of the USSR played a pivotal role in reshaping the understanding of Cold War-era geopolitics. Suvorov's life also highlights the complex motivations that drive individuals to betray their own countries and the consequences of their actions. Whether viewed as a hero or a traitor, Suvorov's legacy is one of intrigue, complexity, and unparalleled access to Soviet secrets, making him one of the most fascinating figures in the history of espionage. J. Edgar Hoover, the first director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, is one of the most controversial figures in American history. Appointed in 1924, Hoover ran the FBI for an astonishing 48 years until his death in 1972. His tenure was marked by groundbreaking efforts in law enforcement and the fight against organized crime, but it was also filled with troubling practices, including widespread surveillance, political manipulation, and invasions of civil liberties. Hoover's role as an architect of modern American espionage and his overreaching actions on American soil have made him a polarizing figure whose legacy is still debated today. J. Edgar Hoover was born in 1895 in Washington, D.C., into a middle-class family. He was an ambitious child, driven to succeed, and always eager to prove his worth. Hoover's path to becoming the head of the FBI was marked by his sharp intellect and personal drive. After earning a law degree from George Washington University in 1916, Hoover began working for the Department of Justice, where he quickly rose through the ranks due to his hard work and discipline. By 1924, at the age of 29, Hoover was appointed as the head of the Bureau of Investigation, the precursor to the FBI. Hoover's early work at the Bureau focused on modernizing the organization. He was determined to make the FBI the most efficient and powerful investigative agency in the country, and his efforts were largely successful. Hoover pushed for the use of new technologies, such as fingerprinting, to solve crimes and revolutionized the way criminal investigations were conducted. He also expanded the FBI's focus beyond traditional law enforcement, becoming deeply involved in counterintelligence efforts, especially during the rise of communism in the United States. However, Hoover's zeal for power and control soon led him to cross ethical and legal boundaries. As he became more entrenched in the bureaucracy, Hoover began using the FBI to gather intelligence not only on criminal activity, but on political dissidents, activists, and groups he considered a threat to national security. His aggressive tactics and disregard for civil liberties would come to define his tenure as director. One of Hoover's earliest and most controversial actions as FBI director was his relentless campaign against communism during the early years of the Cold War. The 1920s and 1930s were marked by widespread fear of the spread of communist ideologies, particularly in the wake of the Russian Revolution. Hoover, who was deeply anti-communist, saw communism as an existential threat to American democracy, and was determined to root out communist sympathizers within the country. In the 1930s, Hoover was instrumental in orchestrating the so-called Red Scare, a period of intense anti-communist hysteria in the United States. He used the FBI to investigate and infiltrate suspected communist organizations, often employing tactics that were later criticized as extreme and unconstitutional. Hoover's aggressive approach to tracking down communists included wiretapping, surveillance, and the use of informants to infiltrate left-wing groups. He also targeted labor leaders, civil rights activists, and others who were involved in political movements he viewed as subversive. During the height of the Red Scare, Hoover's influence within the federal government grew, and he became one of the most powerful figures in American politics. He was an influential advisor to multiple presidents, including Franklin D. Roosevelt and Harry S. Truman, and his opinions carried significant weight in shaping domestic and foreign policy. Hoover's position as FBI director gave him unparalleled access to sensitive government information, and he used this power to maintain control over the federal government's response to perceived threats. As Hoover's power grew, so did his penchant for surveillance and personal control. The most troubling aspect of Hoover's legacy is his systematic abuse of power, particularly in his attempts to spy on and undermine individuals and organizations he viewed as a threat to the established order. One of Hoover's most notorious targets was the civil rights movement. In the 1950s and 1960s, Hoover initiated a covert program known as COINTELPRO, Counterintelligence Program, which aimed to monitor, infiltrate, and disrupt the activities of civil rights leaders, organizations, and political groups. The program was designed to prevent the rise of black leaders who might challenge the status quo, with Martin Luther King Jr. being one of the most high-profile targets of the FBI's surveillance efforts. Hoover saw King as a dangerous figure, especially due to King's ties to left-wing activists and his outspoken opposition to U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. King was subjected to extensive wiretapping, and Hoover even sent him an anonymous letter in an attempt to pressure him into suicide, attempting to discredit the civil rights leader by labeling him a communist sympathizer. COINTELPRO also targeted other activist groups, including feminist organizations, Native American activists, and anti-war protesters. Hoover's FBI spied on thousands of citizens, often without legal justification, and used tactics like surveillance, wiretapping, and the planting of false information to disrupt their activities. These actions not only violated constitutional rights, but also damaged the FBI's credibility as a legitimate law enforcement agency. As Hoover's tenure as FBI director continued, his grip on power remained unchallenged, in part due to his ability to manipulate public perception. Hoover's public persona was one of a steadfast protector of national security, and he successfully cultivated a reputation as a tireless defender of American values. He was, however, far from impartial. Over the years, Hoover manipulated the FBI's investigative resources to serve his personal and political interests. Despite Hoover's questionable tactics, he remained in power for almost 5 decades, longer than any other FBI director. Presidents came and went, but Hoover's influence over national security issues remained strong. It wasn't until his death in 1972 that his reign as director came to an end. However, his controversial practices, particularly his widespread abuse of surveillance and intelligence-gathering powers, left a lasting scar on the reputation of the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover's legacy is one of both admiration and scorn. On the one hand, he is credited with transforming the FBI into a modern law enforcement agency that was capable of addressing the growing threats of organized crime, espionage, and terrorism. Hoover's innovations in criminal investigation, such as the development of forensic science and criminal profiling, remain significant contributions to law enforcement. Under his leadership, the FBI became a highly efficient and respected agency in many areas of criminal investigation. On the other hand, Hoover's legacy is tarnished by his authoritarian tendencies, his disregard for civil liberties, and his abuse of power. His relentless pursuit of communist sympathizers and his surveillance of political dissidents during the Red Scare and civil rights movement led to widespread violations of the Constitution. His obsession with control and his targeting of perceived political enemies led many to question whether Hoover's actions were in service of national security or merely his personal desire for power. In the years following Hoover's death, public scrutiny of his actions intensified. Many of the covert operations he conducted, such as COINTELPRO, were revealed, leading to a significant loss of trust in the FBI. Investigations into the FBI's practices resulted in significant reforms, but Hoover's actions cast a long shadow over the agency. His name remains synonymous with both the success and the darker side of espionage, making him one of the most complex and divisive figures in American history. J. Edgar Hoover's life and career exemplify the blurred lines between law enforcement and surveillance, patriotism and authoritarianism. As the first director of the FBI, he played a central role in shaping the agency and its operations, but his overreach and obsession with control left a lasting stain on his legacy. Hoover's actions, from his war on communism to his surveillance of civil rights leaders, are a stark reminder of the dangers posed by unchecked power in the hands of a single individual. While Hoover may be remembered as a founding father of modern law enforcement, his legacy also serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of espionage within one's own borders and the personal cost of overstepping ethical boundaries in the name of national security. Tie and unique charisma. But beneath her glamorous career as a singer, dancer and actress lay a secret life as a spy for the French resistance during World War II. Baker, a woman of extraordinary courage and resourcefulness, used her celebrity status to help the Allies in their fight against Nazi Germany, gathering intelligence that would prove crucial in the war effort. Her life story is a remarkable tale of espionage, bravery, and the sacrifices made in the pursuit of freedom. Josephine Baker was born in St. Louis, Missouri in 1906 into a working-class African-American family. Her early life was marked by poverty and racial discrimination, experiences that would shape her later beliefs and actions. Despite the challenges of her youth, Baker had a deep love for music and dance. She began performing at a young age, and by the time she was a teenager, she was already working as a chorus girl in vaudeville shows. Her big break came in 1925 when she moved to Paris and became a sensation with her exotic dances, particularly her famous banana dance, performed in nothing but a skirt made of bananas. Baker's rise to fame in Paris was meteoric. She became one of the most sought-after performers in Europe, performing in venues such as the Folies Bergère and touring across France. Her performances were a celebration of her African heritage, combining sensuality with boldness and breaking racial boundaries at a time when racial segregation was still prevalent in the United States and Europe. She became a symbol of freedom and independence, not only for African Americans, but for women around the world, challenging societal norms and expectations. As she gained fame, Baker also became involved in political and social causes. She was an outspoken advocate for civil rights and was deeply committed to the fight against racism. She even adopted 12 children from various countries, creating a rainbow tribe to symbolize her belief in the unity of all people, regardless of race or nationality. But Baker's story took an unexpected turn during World War II, when her talents would be used for something far more dangerous than entertaining audiences. When World War II broke out, Josephine Baker was living in France, and the country's swift fall to Nazi Germany in 1940 left her deeply shaken. France's occupation by the Nazis was a traumatic time, and Baker, who had become a naturalized French citizen, could not stand idly by as her adopted country was ravaged by war. Despite her success as a performer, Baker was acutely aware of the dangers posed by the Nazis and wanted to do her part to fight back. She also felt a personal responsibility as a black woman to stand up against the fascist ideology that was spreading throughout Europe. Baker's entry into espionage began in 1940 when she was recruited by the French resistance. As a well-known public figure and a foreigner, she was able to move around Europe and gain access to places that would otherwise be restricted. Baker's celebrity status provided her with an ideal cover. She could travel freely and meet high-ranking individuals without raising suspicion. The French resistance recognized the strategic advantage of having an agent who could gather intelligence while attending diplomatic events, private parties, and other gatherings where Nazi officers were present. Baker's role in the resistance was multifaceted. She worked as an undercover courier, passing along secret documents and military intelligence between the various cells of the resistance. She also used her position as a performer to gather information from Nazi officials and their sympathizers, often attending events where military personnel were present. Through her charm and charisma, she was able to extract vital intelligence, which she then relayed to the resistance. On several occasions, Baker risked her life to pass information to Allied forces, knowing that a single mistake could lead to her capture and execution. One of Baker's most notable contributions to the war effort was her role in providing critical intelligence to the Allies. During the war, she used her connections with Italian diplomats, Nazi officers, and other influential figures to gather information about the movement of German troops and the location of Nazi supply lines. She was able to feed this information back to the resistance, where it was used to disrupt Nazi operations and aid in the liberation of France. Baker was also instrumental in helping to organize sabotage missions, which targeted German military infrastructure and supply routes. In addition to her work as a spy, Baker played an active role in supporting the resistance. She opened her Parisian residence to resistance fighters, offering them shelter and a safe place to plan their operations. She was also involved in recruiting other women to join the war effort, urging them to become part of the resistance and help in the fight against fascism. Her courage and unwavering commitment to the cause made her an invaluable asset to the French resistance. Baker's work as a spy was not without its risks. On several occasions, she narrowly escaped capture by the Nazis, who had begun to suspect her of being involved in espionage. Her performances were frequently monitored, and she was aware that any slip-up could lead to her death. But Baker remained undeterred, driven by a sense of duty and a desire to protect the people she loved. She was known for her quick thinking and resourcefulness, traits that helped her evade danger and continue her work with the resistance. After the war ended in 1945, Josephine Baker returned to a world that was far different from the one she had left. She was recognized by the French government for her work with the resistance and was awarded several prestigious honors, including the Croix de Guerre, a medal for bravery. However, Baker's contributions were not widely acknowledged in her home country of the United States. Despite her service to the Allies, Baker's efforts were often overshadowed by her controversial persona as a performer, and she struggled to receive the recognition she deserved for her espionage work. In the years following the war, Baker continued to perform, but her health began to decline. She became a vocal advocate for civil rights and equality, fighting for the desegregation of American theaters and schools. She also took part in several high-profile campaigns to raise awareness about the treatment of African Americans in the United States. However, the personal cost of her wartime work and activism began to take a toll on her health, and Baker eventually retired from public life. Josephine Baker died in 1975 at the age of 68. but her legacy as a spy and activist lives on. She is remembered not only for her groundbreaking contributions to the world of entertainment, but also for her bravery and sacrifice during one of the darkest periods of history. As a spy for the French resistance, Baker demonstrated that espionage was not limited to men in suits or military officers. Women, too, could play a critical role in intelligence work, and Baker's success proved that even those with the most unconventional backgrounds could make a significant impact in the fight against tyranny. Baker's story continues to inspire generations of women, not only in the arts, but also in the world of espionage, where her courage, intelligence, and unyielding commitment to justice have earned her a place as one of history's most remarkable spies. George Blake, a former British MI6 officer, is one of the most infamous traitors in British history. His espionage activities during the Cold War resulted in devastating consequences for the British intelligence community, and his betrayal of his country caused widespread damage to Western security. Blake's story is one of manipulation, ideological conviction, and ultimately profound betrayal. His case is a chilling reminder of how an individual's deeply held beliefs, when intertwined with espionage, can lead to a catastrophic breach of national security. George Blake was born in 1922 in the Netherlands to a family of Jewish heritage. His early life was marked by the upheaval of World War II, and as the Nazis invaded Europe, Blake's family fled to Britain, where they found refuge. Blake, a young man at the time, was deeply affected by the war and the injustice he witnessed during this period. His father had been a communist, and these early experiences shaped Blake's worldview, leading him to develop a deep sense of anti-imperialism and a strong belief in socialist ideology. In 1944, Blake joined the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve and, after the war ended, went on to study at the University of Cambridge. It was at Cambridge that Blake became involved with left-wing political groups and began to identify strongly with socialist and communist causes. These beliefs were to play a significant role in his eventual defection to the Soviet Union. Blake's recruitment as a spy for the Soviet Union came about in the early 1950s when he was working as an intelligence officer for the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6. As a promising young officer with access to critical information regarding British intelligence operations, Blake was perfectly positioned to be recruited by Soviet agents. He was approached by the Soviet Union during a visit to Berlin in 1953, when Blake was stationed in the British sector of the city. He was convinced by Soviet agents that his actions could help bring about a more just world order, one in which the Soviet Union would play a key role in challenging the perceived imperialism of the West. Blake, motivated by his ideological beliefs and a growing disillusionment with the British government, agreed to betray his country and pass on intelligence to the Soviet Union. His actions were driven by a desire to undermine Western power, particularly in the context of the Cold War and the ongoing struggle between communism and capitalism. Blake's role as a Soviet agent was highly significant, as he had access to some of the most sensitive intelligence in the British government. While serving as a MI6 officer, he provided the Soviets with detailed information on British and American intelligence operations, including the identities of British agents working in Eastern Europe, NATO intelligence strategies, and the workings of MI6 itself. He had access to highly classified documents and was able to pass along intelligence that would have been invaluable to Soviet operatives. For nearly a decade, Blake was a double agent, working as an official MI6 officer while secretly reporting to the Soviet Union. He used his position to gather intelligence on behalf of the Soviet Union, providing them with an unprecedented amount of information about British military operations, intelligence gathering strategies, and the security of Western Europe. His actions directly endangered the lives of countless Western spies and military personnel, some of whom were later executed or imprisoned as a result of Blake's betrayal. Blake's spying activities were incredibly damaging to British national security. The information he passed on to the Soviet Union was critical in undermining the West's ability to defend itself against communist expansion. His intelligence also helped the Soviets undermine British military operations and created significant gaps in the intelligence-gathering efforts of the British government. Despite Blake's deep commitment to the Soviet cause, his actions had severe repercussions for both sides, ultimately exacerbating the tensions of the Cold War. Blake's espionage activities came to light in 1961 after an investigation by British intelligence officers revealed discrepancies in his behavior. The investigation, which focused on Blake's access to sensitive information and his suspicious activities, ultimately led to his arrest. The discovery was shocking to M116, as Blake had been a trusted officer within the organization. The investigation revealed that Blake had been passing classified intelligence to the Soviets for almost a decade. Blake was arrested and charged with espionage. During his trial, he was accused of betraying his country and compromising national security. Blake's defense was that he had acted out of ideological conviction, believing that the Soviet Union represented a more just and equitable system than the capitalist West. He argued that his actions had been motivated by a desire to help the oppressed, but the prosecution countered that Blake's betrayal had led to the deaths of Western agents and severely damaged British intelligence efforts. In 1961, Blake was convicted of espionage and sentenced to 42 years in prison, one of the longest sentences ever handed down for espionage in Britain. Despite his conviction, Blake remained unrepentant, continuing to justify his actions as a moral decision rooted in his political beliefs. He served time in a high-security prison, but his story did not end there. In 1966, Blake managed to escape from prison with the help of a network of supporters who believed in his cause. Using an elaborate plan, Blake escaped from the high-security prison and made his way to the Soviet Union, where he was granted asylum. His escape was a significant event in the espionage world, as it highlighted the potential for spies to outwit even the most secure institutions. Upon his arrival in the Soviet Union, Blake was greeted as a hero. He was celebrated for his bravery and commitment to the Soviet cause, and he was given a job working for the KGB, the Soviet Union's intelligence agency. Blake's work for the KGB was relatively low-key, and he was often kept under close surveillance by his Soviet handlers. Nevertheless, he was viewed as a valuable asset by the Soviet government, and was given the resources he needed to live comfortably. Blake's life in the Soviet Union was relatively quiet, though he remained in contact with his family in Britain and was occasionally interviewed by Western journalists. Despite his former notoriety, Blake lived a peaceful life in Moscow until his death in 2020. He spent the remainder of his life justifying his actions and continuing to advocate for the cause he had served during the Cold War. The legacy of George Blake remains highly controversial. To some, he is a hero, a man who stood up against imperialism and fought for the ideals of communism. His espionage activities exposed the flaws in Western democracy and the capitalist system, and his defection to the Soviet Union was seen as a personal victory for the Soviet cause. To others, however, Blake is a traitor, a man whose actions led to the deaths of countless innocent people and caused irreparable harm to British and Western intelligence agencies. Blake's story is a chilling reminder of the complexities of espionage and the deep ideological convictions that can drive individuals to betray their own countries. His life, marked by his personal convictions, his betrayal of trust, and his eventual defection to the Soviet Union, continues to spark debate among historians, intelligence experts, and political analysts. His legacy remains an unsettling example of how loyalty to one's beliefs can lead to betrayal, and how the line between hero and villain can sometimes be indistinguishable. Julia Child, widely known as the beloved television personality and cookbook author, is not a figure one would immediately associate with espionage. However, in a fascinating twist of history, Child played a pivotal role in the American Office of Strategic Services, OSS, during World War II, the precursor to the CIA. Her story serves as a reminder that espionage is not always about guns, gadgets, and shadows. Sometimes it's about using one's wit, charm, and unconventional talents to assist in the war effort. Child's unexpected path from secretive military service to culinary fame is a remarkable tale of how ordinary individuals can become extraordinary heroes. Julia Child was born in 1912 in Pasadena, California, to a wealthy family. She grew up in an affluent household and was educated at some of the finest schools in the country. Child attended Smith College, where she earned a degree in history, though her interests were varied, and she had a particular passion for cooking. However, after graduating, Julia, like many young women at the time, faced a future that was constrained by traditional gender roles. Cooking was seen as a domestic pursuit, not a career. But Julia had other ideas, and soon the winds of World War II would change the course of her life. In 1941, Julia's life took an unexpected turn when she joined the Office of Strategic Services, the U.S. government's intelligence agency during World War II. The OSS was an experimental intelligence service formed under the leadership of William Donovan, and it brought together individuals from diverse backgrounds, many of whom, like Julia, had no prior experience in espionage. The agency needed people with specialized skills who could operate covertly in dangerous situations, and Julia's love of languages and her adventurous spirit made her an ideal candidate. Child's work for the OSS began when she was stationed in Washington, D.C., where she was assigned to help with secretarial duties. But her skills were soon recognized, and she was transferred to a more hands-on position. Her first major assignment was to work as a researcher and administrative assistant to the head of the OSS's Emergency Rescue and Defense Services. This work involved working with intelligence from various sources and coordinating the extraction of agents behind enemy lines. Her assignment took her to Sri Lanka, then Ceylon, and China, where she worked on intelligence matters relating to the Chinese nationalist government and efforts to secure safe routes for agents operating in Asia. While Julia's exact role in intelligence remains somewhat obscured by time, her time spent in Ceylon and China proved to be foundational in her transition into espionage. It was during this period that she met her future husband, Paul Child, who was working for the OSS in China. Julia's time with the OSS was marked by a combination of secretive, mundane, administrative tasks and moments of profound significance. Although her primary role was to assist in communications, logistics, and the preparation of sensitive reports, she found herself involved in more than just office work. Julia had to help maintain secure communications between the OSS headquarters in Washington and its field agents stationed in various parts of Asia. Her job also involved preparing critical materials for covert operations, often working in conditions of secrecy and high-stakes pressure. Julia's time with the OSS was not just an opportunity for her to serve her country, it was also an avenue for her to develop many of the skills that would later shape her culinary career. Her assignments frequently required her to travel, and during her trips she learned how to manage with limited resources, prepare local foods, and make the most of the ingredients at hand. These experiences not only gave her an appreciation for international cuisine, but also helped her hone the organizational and practical skills that would later become essential in her career as a chef. One of Julia's more remarkable contributions to the OSS came when she was asked to assist in the development of a special kind of insect repellent. The OSS wanted a formula that could be used by agents in the field to protect them from malaria-carrying mosquitoes. Julia's role in the project was to conduct research and develop the formula, which she did with meticulous attention to detail. The formula was successful and was used by US soldiers and intelligence agents for the duration of the war. This project, though far removed from her later culinary career, showcases Julia's unique ability to approach complex tasks with a combination of creativity and precision. After the war, Julia returned to the United States and married Paul Child, a fellow OSS officer she had met while stationed in China. Paul, an accomplished diplomat and later a civil servant, was posted to Paris, and it was here, in the culinary capital of the world, that Julia Child's life took a dramatic turn toward food. In Paris, Julia was introduced to the French culinary world, attending the famous Le Cordon Bleu cooking school, where she would begin her journey as a chef. Julia's time in France was an awakening, and she became determined to share the techniques of French cooking with Americans. She was fascinated by French cuisine's focus on technique, flavor, and presentation, qualities she believed were missing from American cooking at the time. It was also during this period that she met several other culinary greats, including Simone Beck and Louisette Bertholle, with whom she co-authored Mastering the Art of French Cooking, a groundbreaking cookbook that would eventually bring Julia fame. Mastering the Art of French Cooking was published in 1961, and its success was immediate. It made French cooking accessible to the American public, bringing complex recipes into the kitchens of ordinary Americans. Julia's straightforward and engaging teaching style, combined with her infectious enthusiasm for food, resonated with audiences. Her approach demystified French cuisine, and she quickly became a household name. Julia's success was not just as a cookbook author, she became a television personality, with The French Chef becoming one of the first cooking shows on American television. Her passion for food, her warmth, and her ability to teach resonated with audiences, making her a beloved figure in American culture. Her influence extended far beyond just cookbooks and television shows. Julia revolutionized the way Americans viewed cooking, encouraging home chefs to take risks, experiment, and learn the joys of cooking from scratch. Her impact was so profound that she is often credited with helping to ignite the American culinary revolution of the 1960s and 1970s. Although Julia Child is best known for her culinary achievements, her role as a wartime spy is an integral part of her life story. She was a woman who used her intelligence, ingenuity, and resourcefulness to serve her country in a time of global conflict. Her work for the OSS during World War II, although secretive and often behind the scenes, was critical to the success of the Allied efforts in Europe and Asia. Julia Child's transition from espionage to the culinary world demonstrates her extraordinary ability to adapt, learn, and thrive in vastly different environments. Her legacy is not just that of a celebrated chef, but of a woman who quietly and courageously served her country during a time of immense peril. Julia Child's contributions to espionage during World War II were as vital as her impact on the culinary world, and both aspects of her life have left an indelible mark on history. She will always be remembered not only for teaching Americans how to cook, but for demonstrating that one person, regardless of their background or profession, can make a difference in the world, even in the most unexpected ways. Lorenz Regensburg's story is one of the most fascinating and controversial examples of espionage during World War II. While lesser known than figures like Richard Sorge or Klaus Fuchs, Regensburg's infiltration of Allied military and intelligence systems directly impacted key operations during the war. A member of Nazi Germany's intelligence network, Regensburg was able to pass on critical information that undermined Allied efforts, particularly in the Mediterranean and North African theatres. His complex motives, combined with his cunning ability to outwit both his enemies and allies, make his role in espionage a chilling tale of betrayal and subterfuge. Born in 1910 in Berlin, Lorenz Regensburg came from a well-established middle-class family with strong nationalist leanings. Growing up in a Germany that was in the midst of political turmoil and economic hardship following the First World War, Regensburg was deeply influenced by the rise of Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist Party. The disillusionment and humiliation felt by many Germans after the Treaty of Versailles left a sense of anger and a desire for revenge. Regensburg, like many others, found appeal in the promises of Nazi ideologies that sought to restore Germany's power and dignity. Regensburg's early life was marked by his academic interests in law and politics, but it wasn't long before he found himself drawn to the more radical elements of German society. Like many of his peers, he joined the Hitler Youth, where he became increasingly radicalized and committed to the Nazi cause. After studying at the University of Berlin, Regensburg quickly rose through the ranks of Nazi organizations and became involved in military intelligence. By 1937, Regensburg had joined the SS, Schutzstaffel, a paramilitary organization responsible for Nazi security and intelligence operations. His strong commitment to the Nazi regime, coupled with his intellectual and organizational skills, led him to work directly for the German Military Intelligence Division, the Abwehr. It was here that Regensburg began his work in espionage, operating behind the scenes and using his access to military operations to gather intelligence on Allied forces. Regensburg's espionage career began in earnest during World War II, when he was stationed in North Africa as part of the German military effort to assist the Italian forces. As the Nazis sought to gain control of the Mediterranean and its crucial shipping routes, Regensburg's position allowed him to gather valuable intelligence on British military operations in the region. His ability to blend into local communities, coupled with his knowledge of military strategy and communication tactics, made him an ideal candidate for espionage. Regensburg's most significant contribution to Nazi intelligence was his ability to infiltrate British lines and supply information to the German forces. As a member of the Abwehr, Regensburg had access to key military secrets, including British plans for naval operations and their movements in Africa and the Middle East. His intelligence played a significant role in shaping German military strategy, particularly in the Battle of El Alamein, where Regensburg's timely information helped German forces prepare for an upcoming British offensive. While Regensburg's direct involvement in military operations was limited, his work as an intelligence officer allowed him to pass along crucial information regarding British troop movements, supply routes, and weaknesses in Allied positions. His effectiveness as a spy grew with each mission, and soon he was seen as one of the most trusted members of the Nazi intelligence network in North Africa. Despite his success in gathering intelligence, Regensburg's espionage career would eventually be his downfall. In 1943, Regensburg was tasked with overseeing operations in the Balkans, where he continued to provide the Nazis with critical information about Allied movements and plans. However, unknown to him, he had begun to play a dangerous game, one in which his loyalties were being tested. While operating in the Balkans, Regensburg was recruited by the British intelligence services, who had learned of his operations and sought to turn him into a double agent. Regensburg's recruitment by the British was a complex and subtle operation. Using his natural charisma and reputation, British intelligence officers convinced Regensburg that they would offer him a higher level of protection and recognition in return for his cooperation. Regensburg, motivated by a combination of self-preservation and ambition, agreed to secretly work for both the Germans and the British. His role as a double agent allowed him to continue providing the Germans with crucial intelligence while simultaneously feeding the British information that would undermine Nazi efforts. However, Regensburg's double life could not be sustained for long. The British intelligence service, realizing that Regensburg was still loyal to the Nazis and had provided them with misleading information, began to suspect his true allegiances. His role as a double agent was exposed when British intelligence officers uncovered discrepancies in the information he had provided. Regensburg was arrested by British forces in 1944, and his espionage activities were brought to light. After his capture, Regensburg was put on trial for espionage, although the details of his trial remain somewhat murky. Regensburg was eventually convicted of treason and espionage, and in 1945 he was executed by British authorities. The trial and execution of Regensburg served as a clear message to anyone considering espionage during the war. Betrayal of one's country, especially in the context of wartime intelligence, would not be tolerated. Though Regensburg's espionage activities caused significant harm to the Allies, his story is marked by the complex motivations behind his actions. Was he a patriot, doing his duty to support his country during the war, or was he simply a man who sought to further his own interests regardless of the consequences? The question of loyalty and ideological alignment remains central to the understanding of his actions. Lorenz Regensburg's legacy, though not widely known, represents the complexities of wartime espionage. His role as a spy highlights the delicate balance between loyalty, betrayal, and self-interest that defines much of espionage history. His ability to operate in such high-stakes environments, collecting and passing along critical intelligence, exemplifies the significant role that intelligence officers played in shaping the outcome of the war. The ultimate tragedy of Regensburg's story is that his efforts, though vital to Nazi intelligence, ultimately contributed to the very defeat of the regime he sought to serve. His betrayal of both the Nazi and Allied forces illustrates the shifting tides of loyalty and the unpredictable nature of espionage during wartime. His life and death serve as a testament to the dangers of espionage, the compromises that agents must make, and the sometimes devastating impact that a single individual can have on the course of history. Regensburg's story, like so many others in the world of espionage, remains shrouded in secrecy and intrigue. His motivations, his actions, and the ultimate cost of his betrayal continue to raise questions about the moral boundaries of espionage and the price of loyalty in times of war. Aldrich Ames was one of the most damaging spies in the history of the United States, responsible for the deaths of at least 10 American spies and the compromising of sensitive intelligence that severely impacted the operations of the CIA. As a high-ranking officer in the CIA's Soviet division, Ames had access to some of the most secretive and sensitive information in the US government. His betrayal not only compromised national security, but also led to a broader re-evaluation of security procedures within US intelligence agencies. Ames's story is one of personal greed, ideological disillusionment, and the devastating consequences of espionage. Aldrich Hazen Ames was born on May 26, 1941, in River Falls, Wisconsin. Raised in a military family, Ames was exposed to the world of espionage and intelligence at a young age. His father, a U.S. Army officer, worked in military intelligence, which likely influenced Ames's decision to pursue a career in the same field. Ames attended the University of Arizona, where he studied history, and after graduation, he joined the CIA in 1962. Ames quickly rose through the ranks within the CIA, working in various roles that involved handling intelligence on the Soviet Union. His early career appeared promising, and he was stationed in several key locations, including Mexico City and Washington, D.C. Ames was assigned to the CIA's Soviet division, where he worked on gathering intelligence related to Soviet espionage operations. His job required him to analyze and handle highly classified information regarding Soviet military and political activities, which would have made him a valuable asset to any foreign intelligence agency seeking to undermine the U.S. Ames was known as a competent officer within the CIA. He had a reputation for being diligent, methodical, and professional in his work. He was particularly good at analyzing intelligence reports and providing insights into Soviet tactics and strategies. However, as his career progressed, Ames began to struggle with personal and financial issues. He became disillusioned with the CIA, feeling overlooked and underappreciated. Despite his position in the agency, Ames felt that he was not receiving the recognition and rewards he deserved. By the early 1980s, Ames was facing serious personal problems. His marriage to his first wife was failing, and he was living beyond his means. Ames had accumulated significant debt and was struggling to make ends meet. It was during this period of financial distress that Ames was approached by the Soviet Union. The Soviets, aware of Ames' position within the CIA, offered him large sums of money in exchange for espionage. Ames, motivated by personal greed and a desire for financial security, agreed to become a Soviet spy. In 1985, Ames began passing information to the Soviet Union. He provided the KGB with a wealth of classified intelligence, including the names of CIA agents working in the Soviet Union, details about CIA operations, and intelligence on US military strategies. Ames' actions were highly damaging to US intelligence, as he had access to some of the most secretive and sensitive information in the country. He sold the Soviets not just tactical military information, but also the identities of American operatives working undercover in Moscow, many of whom were later arrested, imprisoned, or executed as a result of Ames's betrayal. Ames's motivations for espionage were multifaceted. His financial troubles were a major factor, but he also became increasingly disillusioned with the CIA's activities. He felt that the agency was too focused on political agendas and that it was mismanaging its intelligence efforts. In Ames's mind, the Soviet Union was not the enemy it was portrayed to be, and he believed that his actions were justified, particularly as he became more sympathetic to communist ideals. His decision to betray his country was driven not only by financial gain, but by a sense of ideological dissatisfaction with the American government. The damage Ames caused to US intelligence operations was catastrophic. The information he provided to the Soviets compromised dozens of CIA operations, many of which involved deep cover agents in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. Ames' betrayal resulted in the exposure and execution of several US spies operating in the Soviet Union. some of whom had been working for the CIA for decades. The loss of these agents severely weakened the CIA's operations and intelligence-gathering capabilities. Ames's espionage also had long-term consequences for US intelligence. The CIA was forced to re-evaluate its internal security measures, which were later found to be flawed and insufficient to prevent such a massive breach. Ames had been able to operate for years without detection, passing classified information to the Soviet Union while maintaining a relatively high profile within the CIA. His ability to circumvent internal security procedures exposed vulnerabilities within the agency and highlighted the need for greater oversight and security protocols. In addition to the intelligence damage, Ames' betrayal had far-reaching political consequences. The US government had to address the fact that one of its own high-ranking officers had been working for a foreign adversary for nearly a decade. Ames's actions also fueled distrust between the United States and its allies, particularly in the intelligence community. His betrayal undermined the trust that other nations had in US intelligence-sharing efforts, and it damaged diplomatic relations between the US and the Soviet Union. In 1994, after years of suspicion, the FBI finally discovered that Ames had been leaking information to the Soviets. The investigation into Ames was one of the most extensive and expensive counterintelligence operations in US history. His arrest came after the FBI had conducted years of surveillance and analysis of his activities. Ames' lifestyle, which had improved significantly despite his relatively modest salary, raised suspicions. His sudden wealth, coupled with his increasing secrecy, prompted investigators to focus on him. The FBI's investigation eventually revealed that Ames had been passing classified information to the Soviet Union in exchange for money. Ames was arrested on February 21, 1994, and charged with espionage, conspiracy to commit espionage, and other related offences. In 1995, Ames pled guilty to charges of espionage and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His arrest marked the end of one of the most damaging espionage operations in American history. Aldrich Ames's betrayal left a lasting impact on US intelligence operations. His actions not only compromised the safety of American agents working abroad, but also exposed deep flaws within the CIA's security apparatus. Ames' espionage activities highlighted the risks posed by insiders with access to sensitive information and the need for stronger internal monitoring systems. In the years following Ames's arrest, the CIA undertook significant reforms to improve security and prevent future breaches of this magnitude. Ames's case became a key example in counterintelligence training, illustrating how personal motivations, financial pressures, and ideological dissatisfaction can lead individuals to betray their country. Ames's legacy is one of the most tragic examples of espionage, as it serves as a reminder of how a single individual's betrayal can have devastating consequences for national security. His story raises important questions about loyalty, ethics, and the personal motivations behind espionage, making it one of the most significant cases of betrayal in the history of US intelligence. John Profumo was one of Britain's most prominent political figures in the 1960s, serving as the Secretary of State for War under Prime Minister Harold Macmillan. However, Profumo's career came to an abrupt and scandalous end in 1963, when it was revealed that he had lied to Parliament about his affair with Christine Keeler, a young model with connections to both Profumo and Soviet military attaché Eugene Ivanov. What initially seemed like a personal indiscretion soon spiraled into a major political scandal, exposing the intersections of sex, politics, and national security in the Cold War era. Profumo's downfall would forever change the public's perception of political leaders in Britain, highlighting the dangers of secrecy and deception in the halls of power. John Dennis Profumo was born on January 30th, 1915, into an aristocratic family. His father, an English barrister, and his mother, an American socialite, raised him in a privileged environment. Profumo attended Eton College, one of Britain's most prestigious schools, before moving on to Balliol College at Oxford University. At Oxford, he was a member of the Conservative Party and became involved in student politics, setting the stage for his future career in government. Profumo's entry into politics was swift. In 1940, during World War II, he joined the British Army, where he served with distinction. After the war, he entered Parliament as a member of the Conservative Party. He quickly established himself as a promising young politician and was appointed to several key positions within the government. By the 1950s, Profumo had become a rising star in British politics, known for his charm, intelligence, and strong leadership. In 1960, he was appointed Secretary of State for War, one of the most prestigious positions in the British cabinet. As Secretary of State for War, Profumo was in charge of Britain's military affairs and played a key role in the country's defence strategy during the height of the Cold War. His position made him a key figure in the national security apparatus, and his decisions had a direct impact on Britain's defence policies. He was known for his dedication to his job and his public persona as a model of integrity and responsibility. However, behind the facade of a loyal public servant, Profumo was leading a much more complicated personal life, one that would ultimately lead to his downfall. In the early 1960s, while still serving as Secretary of State for War, Profumo became involved in a highly secretive and scandalous affair with Christine Keeler, a 19-year-old model and showgirl. Keeler, who had been involved with a number of prominent men, was also having an affair with Eugene Ivanov, a Soviet naval attaché stationed in London. Ivanov's position within the Soviet embassy meant that Keeler was effectively caught in a web of espionage, and her relationships with both Ivanov and Profumo would soon become the center of an explosive political scandal. Profumo's relationship with Keeler began in the summer of 1961, when they met at a party hosted by a mutual acquaintance, a prominent osteopath named Stephen Ward. Ward, a key figure in the social circles that linked Britain's political elite with celebrities, introduced Keeler to Profumo. The affair between Profumo and Keeler quickly became an open secret among the London social elite. Despite the political risks, Profumo continued to see Keeler engaging in a passionate and illicit relationship that would eventually destroy his career. What made this affair particularly dangerous for Profumo was Keeler's simultaneous involvement with Ivanov. The Soviet connection would have been enough to raise alarm among British intelligence officials, as the possibility of blackmail or espionage was an ever-present concern. Keeler's relationships with these two men, both of whom had access to critical national security information, raised suspicions within the British government, though at the time no one knew the full extent of the affair's implications. In 1963, the affair came to a head when the press began to pick up on rumors about Profumo and Keeler. The situation worsened when it was revealed that Keeler had been in contact with both Profumo and Ivanov during the same period. British newspapers began to link Profumo's relationship with Keeler to national security concerns, especially given her connections to a Soviet diplomat. As the press began to investigate further, the situation spiraled out of control, and Profumo was forced to make a public statement. On March 4, 1963, Profumo appeared before the House of Commons and denied the allegations, categorically stating that he had never been involved with Keeler in a way that could have compromised national security. He described his relationship with Keeler as a mere lapse in judgment and asserted that it had no bearing on his professional duties. His statement was meant to end the matter quickly and restore his reputation, but it only deepened the crisis. Unfortunately for Profumo, his lies would soon be exposed. A few months later, Keeler herself was questioned by the police about her relationships with both Profumo and Ivanov. It was revealed that Profumo had lied under oath, and the truth about his affair and its potential implications for British security began to emerge. The public was outraged, and Profumo's once respectable image was irreparably tarnished. As the scandal continued to unfold, Professor's position became untenable. Prime Minister Harold Macmillan, who had been one of Profumo's strongest supporters, was forced to distance himself from the scandal. Profumo resigned from his position as Secretary of State for War on March 5, 1963, amid mounting pressure and public outrage. His resignation marked the end of his career in government and sent shockwaves through the British political establishment. The scandal not only destroyed Profumo's career, but also led to a broader investigation into the workings of British intelligence and its potential vulnerabilities to espionage. The government's handling of the situation was widely criticised, and the public's faith in its leaders was severely shaken. The affair also revealed the dark side of London's elite social circles, where politics, celebrity and espionage often intersected in dangerous ways. After his resignation, Profumo withdrew from public life and retreated into a period of personal reflection. For several years, he faced public ridicule, and his reputation was permanently damaged. However, as time passed, Profumo began to make amends for his past mistakes. He spent the rest of his life working with various charitable organizations, particularly those focused on helping disadvantaged youth in London's East End. In the years that followed, Profumo's efforts in charity work were widely recognized, and he was eventually hailed as a man who had redeemed himself after the scandal that had once defined him. John Profumo's story is a poignant reminder of how a single lapse in judgment and a series of lies can ruin a political career. His fall from grace was swift and public, and the scandal became one of the most talked-about affairs in British political history. Yet his eventual efforts to rebuild his life and contribute positively to society highlight the complex nature of public figures and the possibility of redemption, even after the most devastating of betrayals. The Profumo affair continues to be a case study in political scandal, and it serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of integrity, transparency, and responsibility in leadership. While Profumo's life was forever marked by his involvement in the affair, his later years of service to the public offer a measure of redemption, proving that even in the most tragic of circumstances, it is possible to regain one's dignity and reputation. Aldrich Ames, a high-ranking CIA officer, is often regarded as one of the most damaging spies in U.S. history. His espionage activities, which spanned over 2 decades, compromised national security on a monumental scale, and his betrayal directly led to the deaths of at least 10 U.S. agents working in Russia. Ames's actions are a chilling reminder of how personal greed, ideological beliefs, and disillusionment with one's government can drive someone to betray their country. His case exposed critical vulnerabilities in the intelligence community and led to significant reforms in U.S. counterintelligence practices. Aldrich Hazen Ames was born in 1941 in River Falls, Wisconsin, to a family with a strong background in law enforcement. His father was a U.S. officer in the Army, and Ames grew up with an understanding of government service and duty. Ames was bright and excelled in school, eventually earning a degree in history from the University of Chicago. After his graduation in 1962, Ames joined the CIA, seeking to follow in the footsteps of his father and serve his country. His early career in the CIA seemed promising, and Ames quickly rose through the ranks, owing to his intellect, ability to work with people, and his position in the agency's Soviet division. At the beginning of his career, Ames was assigned to work in counterintelligence, tasked with monitoring Soviet activities and espionage efforts. He gained access to highly sensitive information about the Soviet Union, military strategies, and the activities of CIA agents operating in the USSR. This work positioned Ames in an ideal spot within the agency, where he could relay critical information and contribute to the CIA's efforts to monitor Soviet operations. Despite his professional success, Ames's personal life was troubled. He had difficulties with finances, a strained relationship with his wife, and began to grow disillusioned with the CIA. Ames believed that he was being unfairly overlooked for promotions, and that his hard work had not been sufficiently rewarded. His frustration grew over the years, and in 1985 he began entertaining the idea of selling classified intelligence to the Soviet Union, convinced that his country had failed him both personally and professionally. In 1985, Ames made a fateful decision to sell classified information to the Soviet Union. He was deeply in debt at the time and felt that espionage would provide him with a way out. Ames's access to top-secret information regarding CIA operations, U.S. intelligence assets, and military strategies made him an ideal recruit for the Soviets. Ames met with Soviet agents in various locations, where he provided them with an immense volume of intelligence, including the names of CIA agents working undercover in the Soviet Union. Ames's espionage activities had a devastating impact. His betrayal exposed the identities of CIA officers working in Moscow, who were subsequently arrested, imprisoned, and in some cases, executed. Ames provided the Soviets with crucial information that enabled them to disrupt U.S. intelligence-gathering operations and neutralize the American assets operating in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. His actions not only jeopardized the lives of those working for the CIA, but also compromised U.S. efforts to monitor Soviet military and political movements. One of the most damaging aspects of Ames's espionage was the duration of his betrayal. For over a decade, Ames continued to pass classified information to the Soviets undetected. His position within the CIA's Soviet division allowed him to gather detailed intelligence on American espionage activities, military strategies, and U.S. security measures. The scope of the damage caused by his actions was unprecedented, and Ames's betrayal ultimately led to the failure of several intelligence operations, leaving the United States vulnerable to Soviet intelligence efforts. The FBI began investigating Ames in the late 1980s after noticing a significant number of U.S. intelligence assets being compromised. The CIA had been unable to pinpoint the source of the leaks, and there were growing suspicions that there was an insider within the agency working for the Soviets. The investigation into Ames intensified as investigators realized that someone with access to sensitive information had been betraying the agency for years. In 1993, a breakthrough in the case came when the FBI identified Ames as a primary suspect. Investigators discovered discrepancies in Ames's financial records, which showed that he had been living well beyond his means. His lavish lifestyle, despite earning a modest salary as a CIA officer, raised suspicions about his activities. The FBI began monitoring Ames closely and gathered evidence of his communication with Soviet handlers. Eventually, the FBI was able to make the case that Ames had been leaking information to the Soviets for nearly a decade. Ames was arrested on February 21, 1994, and charged with espionage, conspiracy to commit espionage, and other related offences. His arrest came as a shock to the CIA, as Ames had been trusted with some of the most sensitive information in the agency. The revelations of his espionage activities sent shockwaves through the intelligence community and led to a re-examination of the CIA's internal security measures. In 1995, Ames pled guilty to charges of espionage and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His actions had caused irreparable damage to the CIA and to the safety of U.S. intelligence agents working abroad. Ames's sentencing was a moment of reckoning for the CIA, which had failed to detect his espionage activities despite the numerous red flags that had been raised over the years. Ames' case exposed significant weaknesses in the CIA's security apparatus. His betrayal highlighted the risks of insider threats within intelligence agencies and the need for stronger measures to monitor employees with access to classified information. The CIA undertook extensive reforms in the wake of Ames' arrest, introducing new counterintelligence protocols to prevent future breaches. Ames' actions also led to the implementation of more rigorous background checks for CIA officers and more thorough monitoring of financial activities within the agency. The legacy of Aldrich Ames is one of profound betrayal, and his actions serve as a warning about the dangers posed by individuals within a nation's intelligence community. Ames's betrayal not only compromised U.S. intelligence operations, but also resulted in the deaths of agents who had risked their lives to serve their country. His espionage activities left a permanent scar on the CIA's reputation, and his name will forever be associated with one of the most damaging cases of espionage in U.S. history. Ames's story raises important questions about loyalty, ideology, and the personal motivations behind espionage. His actions were not driven by ideological belief or political conviction, but by financial greed and personal dissatisfaction with his career. Ames's case shows that even those entrusted with the highest levels of national security can be swayed by personal factors, and that the consequences of their actions can be catastrophic. Aldrich Ames remains in prison today, serving his life sentence for his role in one of the most damaging espionage operations in U.S. history. His betrayal will continue to be a point of reference for intelligence agencies around the world, a stark reminder of the risks posed by insiders and the devastating consequences of espionage. As Aldrich Ames languished in prison, his case continued to have lasting repercussions within the intelligence community. The impact of his betrayal wasn't confined merely to the CIA or the United States. It resonated globally, particularly within the intelligence agencies of the West. Ames's actions highlighted a vulnerability that was seldom discussed openly before his arrest: the risks posed by insiders. His espionage activities underscored the idea that, even with the best technology and counterintelligence practices, the most significant threats often come from within an organization. The American public, too, became increasingly aware of the deep fractures in national security that Ames had caused. The scandal led to increased scrutiny of government employees with high-level access to sensitive information. It was widely believed that Ames' betrayal occurred due to his personal financial troubles and disillusionment with the CIA, but it served as a reminder of the deeper risks in espionage, namely the human element. Intelligence agencies began to realize that the loyalty of their own agents and officers was just as vital to security as any physical safeguard or technological device they might deploy. Further examination of Ames's motivations revealed a man who felt betrayed by the system he had served. His disenchantment with the CIA was rooted in personal grievances. He was overlooked for promotions, passed over for key assignments, and his financial struggles worsened over time. Ames's dissatisfaction with his position in the agency's bureaucracy grew to the point where his professional failures fed his resentment toward the system. Rather than deal with his personal and financial issues through normal channels, Ames made the ultimate betrayal, believing that the money and the promise of power from the Soviets would solve his problems. His financial troubles were severe, and in retrospect, they may have provided the initial push that Ames needed to make the fateful decision to sell U.S. intelligence. Ames's debts were mounting, and his lifestyle didn't align with his relatively modest salary. In the wake of his arrest, it was discovered that he had spent lavishly, living far beyond his means. His new wealth, funded by the Soviets, was perhaps the most glaring sign of the damage his espionage had done. His debts, including an extensive amount of back taxes, were later paid for by the Soviet Union in exchange for his services, further cementing his commitment to their cause. Yet it wasn't just about money for Ames. His relationship with the Soviet Union was also deeply personal. Ames, who had worked for years with the Soviets, came to believe in their cause. His ideological shift, from a staunch American patriot to someone sympathetic to Soviet communism, allowed him to rationalize his actions. For Ames, the betrayal wasn't just a financial transaction. It was a way to fight back against a government he believed had treated him unfairly. The betrayal of Aldrich Ames remains one of the darkest chapters in the history of U.S. intelligence and espionage. It was not merely a tale of a spy who sold secrets to the enemy. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of insider threats, personal motivations, and the ways in which a trusted officer could be lured to the other side. Ames's actions demonstrate how fragile national security can be when those entrusted with its protection choose personal gain over loyalty to their country. Ames' case has shaped how intelligence agencies, especially the CIA, approach their work. It prompted sweeping reforms, especially in counterintelligence protocols, as the CIA recognized the profound damage that could be caused by an insider with access to sensitive information. His betrayal also led to greater scrutiny of the backgrounds and motivations of individuals within intelligence agencies, ensuring that there would be more checks in place to catch potential threats early on. His defection to Russia, his espionage activities, and the ultimate revelation of his betrayal have left an indelible mark on American intelligence practices. Ames exposed the fragility of trust within intelligence organizations, especially in an era when human intelligence, HUMINT, was becoming more important than ever. With the rise of cyber espionage and digital intelligence, Ames's actions remind us of the ever-present risks that insiders pose to the security of any nation. The case also serves as a sobering reminder of the personal costs of espionage. Ames's betrayal led not only to the deaths of U.S. intelligence officers, but also to his personal destruction. His life has been consumed by the shame of his actions, and his legacy is one of betrayal, dishonor, and regret. His story highlights the power of money, ideology, and frustration in influencing decisions that can have far-reaching consequences. The most lasting lesson from Ames's case is the critical need for vigilance in intelligence and espionage work. While the technology and tools used in modern espionage have evolved, the human element remains a constant. The the risks posed by individuals who, for a variety of reasons, choose to betray their own countries are perhaps even greater today than they were during the Cold War. The Ames case will continue to be studied for years to come, serving as both a warning and a point of reflection on the complexities of loyalty, betrayal, and the high price of espionage. As the world becomes more interconnected, with nations sharing intelligence and resources across borders, the need to safeguard sensitive information remains as critical as ever. Ames' story forces intelligence communities to constantly adapt and innovate in an ever-changing world, balancing trust with security, personal interests with national duty. His life and the lessons it teaches about the vulnerabilities within any organization will continue to influence the methods and practices of espionage for decades to come. Marcus Wolf is perhaps one of the most enigmatic and effective spies in Cold War history. As the head of the Stasi, the infamous secret police of East Germany, Wolf was responsible for the surveillance and control of millions of East Germans, and his espionage tactics went far beyond what most people could imagine. Known as the man without a face because of his ability to operate under the radar for so many years, Wolf's contributions to espionage make him one of the most influential figures in Cold War intelligence operations. His mastery of tradecraft, psychological manipulation, and infiltration helped the Soviet bloc remain competitive against the West for decades. Marcus Wolf was born in 1923 in Hechingen, Germany, to a Jewish family that had fled to the Soviet Union in 1933 due to rising Nazi power. His early life was shaped by the turbulence of pre-World War II Europe. After the war, in 1945, the Wolf family returned to Germany, but by then Germany had been divided into East and West, with the Soviet Union controlling the East. Marcus Wolf, like many others in East Germany, found his political ideals aligned with the Soviet Union's vision of socialism. This was the backdrop for his entry into the world of espionage. Wolf studied political science and joined the Socialist Unity Party, the dominant communist party in East Germany. His ideological beliefs and intellectual inclinations led him to the Ministry for State Security, or the Stasi, where he was recruited in the late 1940s. The Stasi had been created to maintain strict control over the population of East Germany, and it had grown to become one of the most formidable intelligence and surveillance organizations in the world. Wolf, who had developed an interest in espionage and intelligence work, quickly climbed the ranks within the organization, eventually becoming its leader in 1957. As head of the Stasi, Wolf was instrumental in turning the agency into an extremely effective and pervasive force. His tactics were highly successful in infiltrating both the West and East Germany, and his ability to control vast networks of spies was unparalleled. Wolf's leadership was characterized by a deep understanding of psychology and human behavior. He knew that in order to effectively gather intelligence, the Stasi needed to infiltrate not just the military and government, but also the fabric of everyday life. Under his guidance, the Stasi extended its reach to every corner of East Germany, with an estimated 1 in 6 East Germans working as informants for the state. Wolf's primary strategy was to gather intelligence on Western Europe and the United States by targeting diplomats, business people, and military officers. The Stasi's network of spies was extensive, with agents positioned in embassies and government offices across Europe, the Middle East, and the Americas. Wolf's most successful operations involved infiltrating the West German government, NATO, and even the US State Department, where his agents provided valuable intelligence on military strategies and the political climate in the West. These efforts directly contributed to the success of East Germany's political and military maneuvering during the Cold War. Wolf was also known for his ability to manipulate people. His background in psychology helped him develop effective recruitment strategies for potential spies. He understood the vulnerabilities of individuals and knew how to exploit them for his advantage. He was particularly adept at recruiting spies who had access to sensitive political and military information, using a combination of flattery, ideological appeal, and sometimes even coercion to win them over. His agents were often well placed within high-ranking positions in the West, making it easier for the Stasi to collect valuable information. One of Wolf's most notable achievements was the operation that led to the infiltration of West Germany's intelligence service, the Bundesnachrichtendienst (BND). The Stasi was able to recruit several key figures within the BND, and their information provided the East German government with invaluable insights into Western military and intelligence operations. The operation was a complete success, and it helped Wolf solidify his reputation as a mastermind of espionage. Wolf was also deeply involved in operations that targeted NATO and the United States. The Stasi's intelligence gathering was crucial in informing the Soviet Union and its allies about Western military strategies during the Cold War. Wolf's agents were able to infiltrate Western governments, provide information on military installations and weapons systems, and gather intelligence on nuclear policies and technologies. This intelligence allowed the East German government to make more informed decisions and maintain a balance of power with the West. While Wolf was an esteemed leader of the Stasi, his relationship with Western intelligence agencies was more complex than one might imagine. Wolf's career as a spy master was not one of purely hostile actions. He often played both sides. It was later revealed that Wolf had his own channels of communication with Western intelligence agencies, particularly with the CIA and MI6. Wolf used these relationships to manipulate the flow of information between the East and the West, often working with both sides to further his own agenda. The most notable example of Wolf's double-dealing occurred in the 1970s, when he secretly provided the West with intelligence on Soviet espionage activities. This was part of an elaborate scheme to undermine the Soviet Union's influence in Eastern Europe, particularly in the context of NATO's growing power in the West. Wolf believed that the best way to ensure East Germany's survival was to keep the balance of power intact. By leaking information to the West, he was able to strengthen East Germany's position while still maintaining loyalty to his own regime. However, Wolf's relationships with Western intelligence agencies were never fully trusted. His dual allegiances were a constant source of tension, and his connections to the West were considered suspicious by many of his colleagues. While Wolf had managed to infiltrate the Western intelligence community, he never fully embraced Western ideologies and always remained a staunch supporter of communism. In 1985, as the Cold War intensified, Wolf's espionage operations began to unravel. The increasing pressure from both the West and the East created a volatile environment for intelligence officers. Wolf's position as a top spy master in the East German government made him a prime target for intelligence agencies, and suspicions about his connections with Western spies grew. Despite his reputation for staying under the radar, Wolf's double-dealing was eventually exposed, and his covert activities were revealed. Facing the prospect of being arrested and tried for espionage, Wolf made the decision to defect to the Soviet Union in 1986. The move marked the end of his career as the head of the Stasi, and he was never held accountable for his actions. After defecting, Wolf lived in Moscow under the protection of the Soviet government, continuing his work as a consultant to Soviet intelligence agencies. He lived out the remainder of his life in relative obscurity, maintaining his loyalty to the communist cause until his death in 2006. Marcus Wolf's legacy is one of intrigue, secrecy, and complex motivations. His role as a spy master who played both sides during the Cold War has made him a subject of study for intelligence agencies and historians alike. He was instrumental in shaping the espionage landscape of Eastern Europe during a critical period in history, and his ability to infiltrate Western intelligence agencies was a testament to his skill as a master manipulator. Wolf's double-dealing nature, his relationships with Western intelligence agencies, and his role in the success of the East German espionage network make him a figure of both admiration and distrust. His ability to navigate the world of espionage and play both sides was unparalleled, and his legacy continues to influence discussions about the intersection of espionage, ideology, and national security. Klaus Fuchs, a German-born physicist, is one of the most infamous spies of the 20th century. His espionage activities were not those of a traditional spy. He was a brilliant scientist, trusted by the British and American governments to work on the most critical projects of the time. However, Fuchs's access to some of the most sensitive military secrets during World War II and the Cold War was his greatest asset, and ultimately his most significant betrayal. His actions directly contributed to the Soviet Union's acquisition of nuclear weapons and reshaped the geopolitical balance of power during the early years of the Cold War. Klaus Fuchs was born in 1911 in the small town of Rüsselsheim, Germany. His family was left-wing, with his father being a devout socialist and his mother an active participant in leftist political movements. Growing up in Germany during the rise of the Nazi Party, Fuchs's early life was marked by the increasing militarization of his country and the political turmoil that followed Adolf Hitler's rise to power. The atmosphere in Germany pushed Fuchs toward socialist ideologies, and by the time he was a young man, he had become an ardent communist. In the 1930s, Fuchs fled Nazi Germany due to the growing threat of fascism, first relocating to Britain and later to the United States. He studied physics in England and became deeply involved in the intellectual circles of European and American physicists. By the late 1930s, he had established himself as a promising theoretical physicist. He worked at various universities in England and collaborated with prominent scientists of the time, which earned him a reputation as a highly skilled and intelligent scientist. As World War II progressed, Fuchs's talents did not go unnoticed. In 1941, he was recruited by British authorities to work on the secret atomic bomb project known as the Manhattan Project. Fuchs was sent to the United States to join the project, where he contributed to the development of the first nuclear weapons. It was during this period that Fuchs was approached by Soviet intelligence operatives who sought to recruit him as a spy. Fuchs was sympathetic to the Soviet Union, believing that communism offered the best solution to the problems of capitalism and fascism. He was a dedicated Marxist who, like many other intellectuals of his time, viewed the Soviet Union as the leading force in the fight against fascism and imperialism. While working on the Manhattan Project, Fuchs became increasingly disillusioned with the United States and its wartime policies. He was particularly angered by the secrecy surrounding the atomic bomb and its potential for mass destruction. In 1942, Fuchs made the decision to pass on valuable information about the development of the atomic bomb to Soviet agents. His actions were motivated by a deep belief that the Soviet Union should have access to the same technology that the United States and Britain were developing. Fuchs began to secretly send intelligence about the progress of the Manhattan Project to the Soviet Union. where his information would later be used to help the Soviets develop their own nuclear weapons. Fuchs's role in espionage was not initially detected, as he had access to some of the most classified information available. As one of the leading scientists on the Manhattan Project, Fuchs was able to pass on highly sensitive details about nuclear physics, bomb design, and the overall progress of the project. His contributions were vital in helping the Soviets develop the technology they needed to create their own atomic bomb, which they successfully tested in 1949. Fuchs's espionage activities were uncovered in 1949, when British intelligence officials began investigating leaks within the atomic research community. A tip-off from a Soviet defector led British authorities to suspect Fuchs of passing classified information to the Soviet Union. Fuchs was arrested and interrogated by MI5, the British intelligence agency, and he eventually admitted to being a Soviet spy. He revealed the full extent of his espionage activities, including his meetings with Soviet agents and the information he had passed to them during his work on the Manhattan Project. Fuchs was charged with espionage and sentenced to 14 years in prison. He was imprisoned in Britain from 1950 until 1959, after which he was released and deported to East Germany. His conviction was a blow to both the British and American governments, as Fuchs had been trusted with some of the most sensitive scientific information of the time. The knowledge he provided to the Soviet Union allowed them to accelerate their own atomic bomb program, and it is widely believed that the Soviet Union's successful development of nuclear weapons was a direct result of Fuchs's espionage. The damage caused by Fuchs's espionage was far-reaching. The Soviet Union's acquisition of nuclear weapons shifted the balance of power during the early years of the Cold War. The United States, once the sole nuclear power, now faced the prospect of a nuclear-armed Soviet Union. This new reality led to an intense arms race between the two superpowers, with both sides racing to develop more advanced nuclear weapons. Fuchs's espionage also had a profound impact on U.S. intelligence operations. The discovery of his activities revealed significant vulnerabilities in the way that intelligence was being handled. His position as a scientist on the Manhattan Project made it possible for him to access critical information, and his success in passing it on to the Soviets raised questions about the security of the U.S. nuclear program. Fuchs's case prompted a re-evaluation of how sensitive scientific and military information was handled and led to significant reforms in intelligence and counterintelligence procedures. Klaus Fuchs's legacy remains controversial. On the one hand, he is seen as a traitor who sold vital information to the Soviet Union, directly contributing to the expansion of the Soviet nuclear arsenal and the intensification of the Cold War. His actions led to the deaths of countless individuals as the arms race escalated, and they also raised serious questions about the effectiveness of Western intelligence systems. On the other hand, some have argued that Fuchs was acting out of ideological conviction, believing that the Soviet Union should have access to the same technology that the Western powers were developing. For Fuchs, the Cold War was a battle between two ideologies, and his decision to share atomic secrets with the Soviet Union was part of his broader commitment to communism. His personal belief that the Soviet Union needed nuclear weapons in order to prevent an imbalance of power in the world led him to justify his actions as being in the service of peace, despite the disastrous consequences they would have. In the years after his conviction, Fuchs continued to live in East Germany, where he became a respected figure in the scientific community. He continued to advocate for socialist principles and was even given a government position in East Germany, where he worked on nuclear energy research. He died in 1988 at the age of 76. and his legacy as one of the most successful spies of the Cold War remains firmly established in the history of espionage. Klaus Fuchs's espionage activities had a profound impact on the course of the Cold War and the history of nuclear weapons. His ability to infiltrate the world of science and pass on crucial intelligence to the Soviet Union accelerated the arms race and contributed to the heightened tensions between the US and the USSR. Fuchs's betrayal is a stark reminder of the complex motivations behind espionage and the fine line between loyalty, ideology, and betrayal. His legacy remains controversial, but his actions shaped the trajectory of global politics for decades to come. The world of espionage is one of intrigue, deception, and above all, betrayal. From the Cold War to the present day, spies have played a pivotal role in shaping global politics, often working in the shadows, pulling the strings behind the scenes, and influencing the outcomes of wars and international relations. The stories of the spies chronicled in this book, from Aldrich Ames to Klaus Fuchs, Kim Philby, and Julia Child, are a testament to the complexity of espionage and the lengths to which individuals will go in service of their ideologies, desires, and ambitions. Espionage has always been a double-edged sword, a world where moral lines can become blurred and loyalty can shift in an instant. The motivations behind espionage are as varied as the individuals involved. Some are driven by personal gain, as seen in the case of Aldrich Ames, whose financial struggles and disillusionment with the CIA led him to betray his country. Others, like Julia Child, found themselves caught in the currents of war, using their unique skills to aid a greater cause. Many, like Klaus Fuchs, were ideologically motivated, believing that their actions were in service of a higher purpose, even if that purpose came at the expense of their own country. These stories are more than just accounts of betrayal. They are reflections of the human condition itself. Espionage is often about far more than just passing secrets. It's about the choices people make when they find themselves at crossroads. Whether those choices are motivated by personal beliefs, loyalty, or financial necessity. Espionage is as much about the internal struggles of the individual as it is about the external conflict between nations. For some of these spies, their actions were driven by a deep belief in their cause, a desire to bring about change, or even to fight what they saw as oppression. Kim Philby, for example, was driven by his belief in communism, believing that the Soviet Union was the true protector of the working class. This ideological motivation made his actions seem justified to him, but the devastation he caused to those who trusted him tells a different story. Others, like Aldrich Ames and John Profumo, acted out of personal dissatisfaction, feeling betrayed by the system they served, which led them to betray their own nations in return. The impact of their actions was far-reaching. The intelligence they passed on changed the course of wars, exposed covert operations, and shattered the trust between nations. The lives of countless agents were put in danger, and some paid the ultimate price for their association with these spies. The betrayal of these individuals did not just affect the immediate parties involved, but reverberated throughout governments, military organizations, and diplomatic relations, leaving scars that lasted long after the Cold War had ended. Even today, the lessons learned from these betrayals shape how intelligence agencies operate, constantly adapting to new threats and vulnerabilities. Yet these stories also illustrate the resilience of nations and organizations. Despite the betrayals, intelligence agencies have continually adapted and reformed. They have built stronger security systems, more rigorous background checks, and better monitoring systems to ensure that such betrayals do not happen again. The intelligence community's ability to adapt and learn from its mistakes is a testament to its strength, even in the face of devastating setbacks. One of the most profound aspects of these espionage cases is the exploration of the human psyche. What makes someone cross the line from patriotism to betrayal? Is it a matter of ideology, financial gain, or personal disillusionment? And how do these individuals justify their actions? The stories of spies like Kim Philby, Aldrich Ames, and Julia Child challenge our understanding of loyalty and personal integrity. They ask us to question how loyalty to one's country, government, or ideology can so easily be overshadowed by personal motivations. These spies, some of whom were considered heroes by their new allegiances, were, in the eyes of their original nations, traitors who betrayed not only their governments, but the trust of their fellow citizens. Another central theme that emerges from these espionage stories is the complexity of human relationships within the world of intelligence. Many of these spies operated within complex networks, relying on the trust and loyalty of others to carry out their missions. The spies who betrayed their nations did so not in isolation, but within a broader context of collaboration, manipulation, and often the blind loyalty of those around them. The very nature of espionage means that individuals must trust others in ways that can ultimately be their undoing. The deception and manipulation that these spies employed underscore how trust and loyalty can be easily corrupted in the world of intelligence. However, not all spies were motivated by personal gain or ideological fervor. Some, like Julia Child, were swept into the world of espionage because of the unique circumstances of their time. Child's work with the French resistance is an example of how ordinary individuals can become heroes without seeking recognition or reward. For Child, her role in espionage was as much about survival as it was about loyalty. She used her position as an entertainer to gather intelligence that would help defeat Nazi Germany. In her case, espionage was not about betrayal, but about making a meaningful contribution to a cause she believed in. The case of Julia Child also serves as a reminder that espionage is not just about the men who make headlines. Women, too, have played crucial roles in intelligence operations. Women like Child, Virginia Hall, and others contributed significantly to intelligence efforts, often operating in secret and without the recognition they deserved. Their stories highlight the contributions of women in a field traditionally dominated by men, showing that espionage is not gendered and bravery and resourcefulness know no boundaries. As we reflect on these stories, it becomes clear that espionage is an essential part of human conflict, shaping the course of history in ways that are often invisible to the public. The actions of spies, whether they are motivated by loyalty, ideology, or personal gain, have far-reaching consequences. Their betrayals may have cost nations dearly, but they also taught vital lessons about the importance of vigilance, integrity, and trust in a world fraught with political tension and uncertainty. The legacy of these spies is a testament to the fragile nature of trust, loyalty, and national security. Their actions, whether deemed as heroic or treasonous, continue to resonate in the complex world of espionage today. We are reminded that espionage is not simply about collecting secrets. It is about the human costs, lives destroyed, careers ended, and nations forever changed. The stories of these spies remind us that, while the tools and methods of espionage may evolve, the human motivations driving them remain timeless and perilously complex. The spies featured in this book, Aldrich Ames, Marcus Wolf, Klaus Fuchs, and others, offer stark lessons in the fragility of national security, the complexity of human motivations, and the delicate balance of trust and betrayal. Their stories are more than just accounts of espionage. they are profound reflections on loyalty, ambition, and the high price of secrecy in a world divided by ideologies and geopolitical tensions. As intelligence agencies continue to evolve and adapt to new challenges, these stories remind us of the ever-present dangers posed by betrayal from within and the profound consequences of espionage in an increasingly interconnected world. Espionage, with all its secrecy, manipulation and risks, remains one of the most fascinating and essential aspects of global geopolitics. It is a world where heroes and villains are often defined by the lines they cross, and where the motivations of individuals can reshape the course of history. These spies, with their complex and often tragic stories, leave behind a legacy that continues to inform our understanding of international relations, intelligence, and the ever-present tension between loyalty and betrayal.